There was devastation everywhere. The sun was breaking through the clouds. Two guys were running forward along the broken street. They crouched down abruptly, and a massive figure appeared in front of them, a silhouette made of stone and metal. It was a golem, red lights flashing in its eyes, its footsteps echoing across the wasteland. No one knew where he came from or who owned him, but he traded trash and scrap metal for food. The golem turned away from the children, his gaze slid forward, and he walked away, leaving behind dust. The boys watched in despair, whispering that other golems had once killed people on the street. Another observer appeared through the piles of scrap metal, silently watching what was happening. A guy with white hair jumped down opposite, holding a heavy bag with various junk. He held the bag forward. The golem extended its hand, raised it high, and shook all the contents into its mouth. At that very moment, food appeared, and Ray's bag was filled to the brim with provisions. The boys, watching this, were outraged and did not understand the meaning of the exchange that was taking place. They were puzzled as to how the white-haired man managed to always receive and never be refused. This food supply could last for 3 days ahead, and this seemed unfair. One of the boys came up with the idea of robbing him, but his friend thought it was crazy because it was about him. The name Phantom of 17th Street was mentioned, and everything around froze in anticipation of something dangerous. Sector 50, entrance to 17th Street. Ray walked forward through the alleys, holding himself confidently. Suddenly, he heard footsteps behind him, and he immediately tensed up, sensing danger behind him. He counted. 7 people followed him in the shadows of the street. Without turning around, he stopped and asked how much longer they would follow him. The answer came from the darkness, and it became clear that his perception had been correct. The gang sneered, wanting to remain unnoticed. A man stepped forward with a knuckle duster on his hand, his toothless smile shining in the darkness of the alley. The name Ron came out of Ray's mouth, and the tension instantly became unbearable. He reminded them of what he had warned them about last time. Ray promised to break his legs the next time they met. Roy blocked the way, confident that Ray would not leave as easily as last time. He demanded that the bag be put on the ground, promising to let him go safe and sound. Ray recognized the lie immediately. He didn't believe that they would let him go. Tension was growing in his chest. There was a saying among children about the white ghost of 17th Street, with a blank face and a quiet gait. They said that you can't look a ghost in the eye, otherwise all the lies will come out. Roy's fist clenched into a knuckle, anger overpowering common sense, and he walked forward. He swung, screaming in rage, but Ray easily dodged the blow. Roy's body flew forward, and in that moment, Ray grabbed him by the collar. The blow landed accurately. Roy screamed in pain and fell to the ground. From the darkness came the cries of his men, anger and fear mixed in their voices. They rushed at Ray in a crowd, clubs flashing in their hands. Threats were heard. Ray moved quickly. Dodging, he struck and knocked out the first opponent. The rest froze, shocked that their comrade had been defeated. Blood splattered in the alley. Knee strikes smashed faces. Screams echoed through the streets. After a while, all the opponents were lying on the floor, beaten and exhausted, and Ray was standing over them. He said that no matter how many people they took with them, nothing would change. Roy was shaking, his voice rising to a scream, calling Ray a monster and demanding that he stop. Ray reminded Ron of his promise to make it impossible for him to ever walk again. Roy, clutching the knife, thrust it forward, trying to threaten. But there was only fear in his eyes. Ray remained calm, and the word monster flashed through his mind, like a reflection in his soul. Perhaps Roy was right. He wondered if it all started back then, at age 10, when Ray realized he was different. One day, he hurt his knee, and the children wondered why he didn't cry from the pain. He himself did not understand why he had to cry if the pain meant nothing to him. The kids from 7th Street were attacking Cale, but he wasn't angry and didn't understand what anger meant. When Belle died, everyone cried and buried him, but Ray's face remained tearless. People around him began to fear him, saying that something was wrong with him. and they walked away. Then he realized that he could not feel emotions like ordinary people around him. Deep down, he still wanted to be like everyone else and understand what it meant to feel. But even after 6 years, Ray still felt nothing inside himself. However, he learned to read the emotions of others and see them differently. In this place, it was forbidden to use blades during fights. The street rule was strict. Ray asked why Ron wanted to force him to fight in the first place. Ron said he had recently found the blade in the trash, but that sounded like a lie. Ray immediately realized that Ron was lying. It was obvious from the color of the vessel in his chest. He saw what others did not notice: a world hidden from human eyes. Inside, each person was a vessel, and emotions filled it with the colors of mana. Anger, hatred, and love were tinged with a red glow visible only to Ray. Mockery and despair flashed blue, cold, and heavy. Joy and inspiration turned into a yellow glow, bright and warm. And there were countless other shades that colored Ray's world. Roy screamed, threatening with a knife, promising to hit if Ray took even one step forward. A deep black mana swirled around him. It was intense fear, naked and obvious. He stuttered, his whole body trembled, but still continued to shout and demand to stop. Ray saw the lies and weakness in Roy's every move and felt no pity. A liar like him, Ray thought, deserved only punishment and retribution. It was raining, and Ray was walking down the empty street, his wet raincoat sticking to his shoulders. Ray went under the bridge, into his hiding place, and into the house. A voice came from ahead. It was Pale, the leader of the children of the underground passages. The children screamed, hugging Ray, calling him Big Brother. They hung on him, laughing, but Pale said they were too heavy together. Everyone sat in a circle. They laid out on the ground what they had found during the day: candy bars, bread, a lighter, coins. The 7 children looked at the spoils and wondered if there was enough for everyone. It was necessary to divide everything among the 7. Ray came up behind him and set down a bag filled to the brim with food. The kids gasped, their eyes lit up, and they shouted in delight that Ray was incredible. They guessed that the food came from the golem, but they themselves could not figure it out. Ray knew that the golem only accepted magical items with residual mana. If you can't see mana, exchange is impossible. The golem won't take the item. Pale ordered the food to be shared, and thanks to Ray, no one will go hungry today. The youngest, Josephine, was the first to receive his share, thanking his older brother. The children lined up, and Ray stepped back and went outside. He thought that there was still not enough food, and maybe it was worth going to the warehouse. Inside him, there was a thought that it was Ray's duty to support the group, because he owed them his life. A year ago, "Sister and brother, come here." Shouts were heard. They noticed someone in the snow and came closer. Ray lay in the snow, almost completely submerged, the cold gripping his body. The children gathered to help him out of the snow trap. Ray was willing to die like that, but he woke up, to the relief of everyone around him. The children asked worriedly if he was okay, and everything seemed fine. He decided to repay all debts, be they simple favors or revenge. Ray listened to the voice behind him. Pale offered him a portion of food. Ray said he was not hungry, but Pale noticed his stomach growling. After giving Ray a piece of the candy bar, Pale insisted that Ray eat too. Ray heard a warning about the black rain that was falling outside. They said that the magicians used too much magic, hence the strange rain. Almost all the magicians live in the sectors with lower numbers, the children whispered. Pale assumed that the golem was also sent by the mages to work. Ray said that the golem could be just a machine, without a soul or emotions. Pale insisted that the golem's movements were only possible through magic. In fact, Ray agreed with Pale. The golem attracted the weapon's mana to its core as it moved. The mana mixed and came out as black gas, creating a strange black rain. The thought that the golem and the rain were somehow connected haunted Ray. But right now, something else was more important. Ray listened to Pei's voice, deciding to go outside. Even the heavy black rain did not stop him. Pei seemed surprised when Ray stepped forward. Pale warned that they should watch the river, that overflowing could be dangerous. Ray did not stop, despite Pale's concerns, and ran forward. Pale, clutching his head, thought that Ray was doing whatever he wanted. The rain poured down without stopping, washing the streets under the black sky. Ray ran without hiding from it. During black rain, everyone tries to hide, believing that a drop can cause illness. But Ray ran straight through the rain, confident that he could protect himself from its effects. A white glow emanated from Ray, making his work easier. He walked up to 18th Street, where Lame Hector's food warehouse stood. He paused behind the bars, assessing the situation, watching the building carefully. There were lights in the windows, voices and laughter, gambling on a rainy day, as Ray usually thought. Ray climbed under the fence and came closer, noticing that the guard was relaxed. The darkness thickened. Hundreds of different types of mana flew around, glowing in the air. Ray attracted the necessary mana particles, mixing them according to his own formula. Mana ignited in his hand and fire appeared. Although the methods were intuitive, he was quite good at using this method. Red mana was harder to control, as if his emotions were interfering with his precision. He wondered if he could create a flame larger and stronger than before. The flying knife flew through the air. Ray felt a threat from behind and dodged. But the knife managed to hit his ear. Blood spurted in small drops. The knife flew past. The danger remained, but the blow did not reach its target. The little rat finally showed up at the warehouse. His presence alerted the warehouse guards. They thought the thief was agile. Ray realized that they had been hiding inside the building from the very beginning. The guy in night vision goggles watched Ray's movements, trying to spot any weakness. The three opponents knew Ray's exact position, which surprised and unsettled him. He didn't expect them to have such equipment and preparation for battle. They threatened that even if he was hiding, they would still find him. The guy with the knife continued to attack, throwing several blades towards Ray. Ray sensed danger and rushed forward, dodging each knife. The opponents were amazed by his speed and precision of movements. Another began to doubt that his partner was a good shot. Something was wrong with Ray. It was difficult to react. Ray moved in and landed a precise punch to the face of one of the attackers, neutralizing the threat. The other attacker shouted as he watched, amazed at Ray's speed. He didn't understand how he could see them. Ray looked at them, their inner feelings, rage and surprise, reflected in his eyes. He saw everything they were feeling. The enemy swung his knife and threw the blade straight into Ray's face. Ray watched the mana flow from the vessel through the enemy's arteries, anticipating the next move. He dodged the knife and rushed forward, attacking the first attacker. He could predict their next move. The third watched this, not believing what was happening and amazed by Ray's ability. He considered what was happening impossible. Ray swung and hit the guy right in the stomach, causing him to fall face down into the sand. The doors in front of Ray opened and another man appeared, surveying the scene. He opened the doors with his foot and came to check what kind of mess was going on here. Ray realized it was a member of Hector Gumprey's band who had come to check out the noise. The man got angry as he looked around the battlefield and spotted Ray, calling him a little rat. He took out all three brothers. The performer of Hector Gumprey's group was no less frightening than the rumors said. Ray decided to retreat, realizing that a direct confrontation would be dangerous. Ray ran forward, swinging his arm to strike, but his opponent didn't even flinch. Gumprey swung, thinking that Ray would not be able to avoid the blow, but Ray dodged it, demonstrating his speed and agility. The enemy noticed his speed and was surprised by the pace of Ray's movements. He jumped back, keeping a safe distance, assessing the situation. Gumprey went on the attack, and Ray continued his cautious retreat, realizing the danger. He instinctively realized that it was impossible to defeat him one-on-one. Gumprey swung repeatedly, and Ray dodged each blow, keeping his distance. Ray decided to target the enemy's open spots using magical power. He swung and delivered a precise blow, directing magical power into the enemy's chest, deciding to aim for open points. Gumprey screamed, clutching his chest, but Ray had already moved away, leaving his opponent confused. After the fight with Gumprey, Ray couldn't go far. The voices in the building demanded to find him. There were orders to search the warehouse, movement around every corner. Ray hid behind the building, assessing escape routes and possible traps. The boys were shouting. Ray threw a stone, causing rustling sounds to set them on a false trail. Ray climbed over the fence, leaving his pursuers behind. He knew that if he was found, the children would not survive long without him, and so he would not repay his debt. It was impossible to run further. There was a dead end ahead, and pursuers behind him. The guys with knives tried to chase him, threatened him, thinking that he was weak and small. If he did not return the stolen goods, they would make a hole in his stomach. Ray didn't see Gumphrey among them, which meant he could win. Ray used his magical power to deflect the blows and deliver precise counterattacks. Blood splashed around, guys fell. Amazed at his strength and speed, Ray's hand glowed with a golden light, and the blows flew straight into the faces of his opponents. Other subordinates heard the noise, but Ray could no longer use magic stably, feeling the limits of his strength. The pursuers lost track of him, his footsteps faded away, and Ray hid in a trash can until the morning. He thought about the safety of the children, and when the rain over the city would stop. Ray fell asleep, and the next day he opened his eyes to the first rays of the sun. The light fell on his face. He climbed out of the tank, assessing the situation around him. There was a guy with a knife in front, and Ray immediately noticed his rage from the light of his blood vessels. Ray had not yet fully recovered, but he held a knife in his hands, ready to defend himself. The enemy went on the attack, trying to strike, but Ray dodged and responded himself. The guy struck back, missed. Ray lost his balance, blood splashed on Ray's face. The knife flew a millimeter from the eye, birds took to the sky, noise filled the street. The boy, bleeding, fell to the ground, unable to continue the fight. Ray remained standing, assessing the situation, preparing for new threats. A man with a revolver appeared ahead, watching Ray carefully. He lit a cigarette, looking around the battlefield, realizing that what had happened was dangerous. It was the boss from 17th Street, Niels, who was interested in the fuss Ray had made this morning. Niels noted that the situation was risky, watching Ray closely. Ray realized that Niels would normally still be asleep at this time, but this was different. Niels heard that Hector's guys were looking for someone in the warehouse, and he came himself. He pointed to the cans behind Ray's collar, realizing he had stolen them from Hector. Niels thought Ray was crazy, but he knew the situation was complicated and required caution. Niels was a difficult person to deal with, a rare one whose emotions were hardly visible. He was one of those people whose emotional vessels are never completely filled. Some people were best left alone, or the consequences could be deadly, Niels warned. But Ray noted that if you don't do this, you can die of hunger. It didn't matter to Nels now he had repaid the debt for his rescue. Ray recalled that he fished Nels out of the river by accident, thinking he was a bag of supplies. But Nelson still realized that thanks to this he remained alive, and the debt was partially repaid. But he was already paying for it, Ray noted. I remembered the incident a year ago. When Ray pulled out Niels, he was betrayed. He was an executor in the 46th sector. Ray didn't think Niels was lying about that. Niels's fighting lessons were structured, and the price of salvation. The conversation shifted to Niels's organization. Ray decided to join them for the safety of the children. Niels was interested in Ray's knowledge of magic, assessing his abilities and understanding of power. Ray was shocked that he knew he was a mage. Ray wanted to know everything about her. Niels exhaled. He already thought he was hallucinating. Niels told about the things that he once asked a magician from a previous organization. He explained that magic uses mana and air, and only a few can see and use it. Ray was interested. The magician mentioned something about flowers, but in his opinion, there was nothing in the flowers. Niels said that mana cannot be seen with ordinary eyes, but can only be recognized in a special way. Ray was surprised, trying to understand what he was seeing then, and asked about the details of the magic. He doubted that Niels had forgotten something important about magic and its manifestations. Niels got angry and swung, but missed. noting Ray's speed and agility. Niels called Ray impudent, appreciating his audacity and courage. Ray only thanked him, taking it as a compliment. He asked again about magic, hoping for an answer. But Niels remained adamant. He knew nothing more. Niels thought for a moment and explained that all the sectors were located along the Elton River, upstream. He explained that Ray would be able to escape the slums and find a better life in other sectors. Niels believed that allowing a child with such abilities to die here would be too great a waste. Niels asked if Ray ever thought about leaving Sector 50 and offered to help with the car. Ray declined, explaining that he cared about the children and had no intention of leaving. Niels suggested starting a shelter to look after street children like Ray. Ray was surprised, but realized that Niels kept his word and could be trusted. He noticed Ray's faded colors, doubting whether he was telling the truth. It was unclear, but he decided to believe. Ray warned that Hector was preparing for war, seeing trucks with weapons at the warehouse. Niels confirmed his observations and understood the seriousness of the situation. Ray noted that the use of firearms in conflict is a direct declaration of war. Defeats in the war would mean suffering for ordinary people and shops. Ray thought that the sums for protection from Niels's organization should be higher. Niels explained that it only seemed that way because of the presence of people worse than him. Ray mockingly remarked that Niels treated him like an old man, even though he was not even married. Ray accepted the remark, but still considered him old. Niels swung, but Ray dodged, showing agility and speed of movement. Suddenly a car pulled up, and the man behind the wheel signaled that it was time to leave. Niels got into the car and warned that there would soon be a battlefield here, and that they needed to find another shelter. He threw an object to Ray, which he caught. Ear medication. The car drove away, leaving Ray alone. On 17th Street, near Central Square, sometime later, the blind storyteller grandmother Viola and her child were sitting on the floor, and Ray approached them. The boy noticed that Ray had not returned yesterday and was surprised by his shabby appearance. Tears came to the boy's eyes. Did Ray really fight? Who did this to him? Ray insisted that everything was fine and that he had simply fallen, hiding the true cause of his injuries. The child burst into tears because he was probably in pain. Ray was surprised that one person could experience so many emotions at once. He gave the canned food to the child and told him to go to the tent, promising to join him soon. Ray approached old lady Viola, finding out that she had told Josephine about the rainbow. He warned her not to tell the children fantasies so that they would get used to the harsh street life. Viola wondered who would continue to carry on the fantasies if not the children. Ray noticed purple mana around Viola, rare and unusual for normal people. He advised to go to another street, since a war could soon start here. The woman thought Ray was a kind young man. The next morning, he was knocking on the door with a delivery. The man opened the door, noticing Ray, and assumed that Ron was now making deliveries. Ray assumed that Ron would not be around for a while. Both of his legs were broken. Ray asked if they were going to evacuate, assessing the situation. But the man had nowhere to go except his shop. Ray noted that once the war begins, there will definitely be no visitors. The salesman noted that the war might not happen. Ray didn't understand what he was talking about. The seller noted that Hector and Niels were discussing the war outside the door, assessing possible outcomes. The door swung open and two fighters appeared, and one guy with a scar. It was the boss of 18th Street, Hector himself. He assessed Ray as a child working alongside an adult, praised him, and gave him survival tips. Hector gave Ray 3 coins, allowing him to indulge himself a little, and left with his men. Gumphrey noticed the cut on Ray's ear and moved forward, leaving the teenager untouched. Ray noticed this and wondered why he didn't say anything. The seller sighed with relief. They finally left. Niels sat on a chair, reporting that the negotiations had failed and war was destined to happen. The seller was shocked by the news. Niels could not accept the terms of the takeover of their organization, considering the terms stupid. The seller confirmed that this was the worst possible outcome, but noted that it was not Niels's fault. The seller realized that he would not be able to open his store for a long time after such events. Niels warned Ray not to leave the shelter anytime soon, assessing the threat. Ray went outside, realizing that the war would limit his freedom of movement. He decided to find as much food as possible before the possible start of war. The car appeared in front, with Gumpry at the wheel, which surprised Ray with its unusual model of car. No one had seen one like it here before. The situation seemed suspicious, and Ray knew he needed to get to the bottom of it. On 18th Street, near the entrance to Hector's base, Ray hid in the bushes, watching Hector's men. He noticed an unfamiliar man getting out of the car and wondered about his identity. They greeted him with all respect, opening the car doors and calling him a magician. The man's aura was dark blue, almost black, with an incredible amount of mana. Ray compared its mana to that which drained the golem as it moved and noticed the rings around the vessels. The rings surrounded by mana seemed to limit his power, making him dangerous. Ray realized that he needed to tell Niels about this man immediately. The boys prepared for war, putting weapons in boxes and taking out everything they needed. Ray appeared near the fence, assessing the situation and supplies. He was surprised to see people moving and wondered where Niels was. The boys were surprised by Ray's appearance. He realized that the boss had gone outside to prepare for war, and the situation was dangerous. He realized that he himself could not remain in the territory for long and that he needed to act quickly. Ray thought about the need to warn Niels, but he knew he couldn't talk directly about magic. He decided to warn about the man with the monocle, assessing the danger of his presence. Night fell on the city. Ray returned to the children sleeping in their shelter, assessing the situation. He thought that the war would not last long, but the outcome was still unknown. Ray discussed with Pei who could win, noting that the groups were almost equal in strength. He understood that for the safety of the children, Niels had to win. If Hector won, the children would be sold into slavery, and this forced them to act with caution. Pei noticed that events had already begun, and they were both surprised by what was happening. They had never heard such a sound. It was strange. Something was wrong. On 17th Street, men were firing rifles and a golem appeared in front of them. The golem was unharmed. They didn't understand what happened to him. He concentrated his magic and released a destructive wave. The boys fell to the ground, struck by the golem's power, its eyes glowing with a blue light. The golem's hand crushed one of the men. Blood splattered around. Horror filled the street. A mage with a monocle watched this, assessing what was happening and his control over the golem. The smell of slop was everywhere. He confirmed the correctness of his creation and ordered the entire territory to be cleared. The sounds of battle grew louder. Ray and Pei took cover under the bridge, assessing the danger. Ray was going to scout out the situation. Pei wanted to go with him. Everything was not normal. But Ray was against it and insisted that he stay. A boy appeared from behind and asked why they weren't sleeping. Pei apologized for waking him up. He promised that they would be back soon, so let him go to bed. Pei decided to stay with the children. They couldn't be left alone. He reminded them not to go too far and to come back. As soon as he finds out what's going on, come back immediately. Ray promised to come back soon. The boy hid in cover while Ray prepared to move outside. Ray walked forward, watching the buildings on fire, assessing the danger. Niels's dead boys were lying on the floor. There was blood and destruction all around. Ray walked up to one of the wounded, listening to the voice and assessing the situation. He heard that the golem had been transferred under the control of the man with the monocle. The boys were unable to resist the golem's power and were killed or wounded. The wounded one asked him to run away before it was too late. He put his hand to the wounded man's face, checking for signs of life and breathing. The guy was dead. He was no longer breathing. Ray realized that he had to act quickly. Otherwise, at this rate, Niels's group would lose. Ray wanted to help him. Ray held a knife in his hand, ready to fight off the threat and protect himself. The golem on the bridge kept the children under control, its magical hand directing destructive power at them. Pei was covered in blood, clutching the wounded boy to himself, trying to save him. Almost everyone was already dead. Corpses were lying on the floor. The golem aimed at Pei with his magical energy. Pei realized the danger and shouted, warning Ray not to come back. Those were his last words. Instantly, Pei received a blast of magical energy from the golem. 17th Street Central. Ray stood among the corpses, realizing he was too late. All around were Niels's murdered people, but he did not see Niels himself among them. Ray assumed that Niels was still alive and ready to act. Suddenly, there was a noise behind him, and Ray turned around. There were children living in that direction, and it was clearly unsafe. Ray rushed towards them, wanting to save them. He saw the tent and froze in horror at the sight of a golem covered in blood. The golem stood in front of a pile of corpses. These were all those who had been kind to Ray. Ray's eyes glowed red. Ray jumped into the air, waving his knife, filled with anger. The golem hit Ray. Blood spurted from his mouth. He crashed into the wall and fell. Ray thought about the need to make sure the others were safe. He remembered the past. Ray stood on the street, looking at all the children and brothers. How they rejoiced at his return home, how they smiled. They all appeared before his eyes. He saw Pei, he was smiling, but suddenly he said that he didn't want him to come back. Ray was amazed. He couldn't believe his eyes. Ray noticed that Lorraine, Leah, Corden, Miles, Josephine, and Pale were dead. He reached out to the corpses, realizing that he had not yet repaid them for their help. Golem stood nearby, but Ray didn't see him. Something else was important to him now. The sound of the golem's magic reminded Ray of the fight, the concentrated power in his hand. It was the same strange sound he heard during the fight. Ray realized that the golem had killed everyone. The children, Niels's people, and the inhabitants of this street. He decided to avenge everyone he lost in this horror. Ray finally decided to move, destroying the golem's magic. Suddenly, the car crashed into the golem, throwing it back, which surprised Ray. The black car attacked the golem, and Niels ran out of it, unharmed. Niels was worried about him. He noted that Ray was fine. Not even any bones were broken. For him, this was a relief. The only thing Ray could say was one word: children. Niels noticed the blood and corpses. He clenched his fist, realizing the scale of the defeat. Ray was crying. Niels felt guilty for being late, but Ray knew it wasn't his fault. Niels hugged Ray, trying to ease the pain of loss. Niels lost all his subordinates in battle. Hector showed cruelty by attracting mages from other sectors, increasing the threat. Ray and Niels planned to look for survivors while assessing the situation on the street. Suddenly, Niels was hit in the chest by a golem, leaving a hole in his body. He looked at the boy, falling straight onto Ray, blood staining everything around him. Ray's heart was colorless. Ray didn't even understand what was happening. He remembered their training together and moments. They trained together, ate donuts, and Niels always helped him. The heart lit up with fiery power. The golem pointed its hand at Ray, concentrating its destructive power. Ray felt angry and decided to avenge everyone he had lost while preparing for the fight. He swore that he would kill everyone. The pitch-black rain mixed with the blood and sweat on the street, creating an atmosphere of horror. Ray shouted Niels's name, but there was no answer, adding to the feeling of hopelessness. He wanted to wake up from a terrible dream, but he realized that everything that was happening was terribly real. The golem took aim at Ray, ready to deliver the killing blow. Ray extended his hand and attacked the golem with magic, clashing blue and red energy. A flash lit up the street as the two energies met in a powerful duel. Ray stated that he is different from the golem. He is a human with emotions. The golem was struck by Ray's fire magic and defeated. A huge hole was left on the floor from the force of the blow, a symbol of destruction and victory. Ray called Niels, but his friend was silent, not reacting to the cries and alarm. "He can't die," Ray repeated. Suddenly, Niels spoke. He asked him not to shake him. He was in damn pain as it was. Niels was sure that he would not see a peaceful death, but he did not think that he would die today. He had no regrets. He had done a lot for someone who started out as a pathetic scavenger. And if he had started trying a little earlier, everything would have turned out differently. He should have started around Ray's age. Ria promised to bring medicine from the car, but it was too late to help. Niels smiled as he handed over the car key and gave Ray some final instructions. He spoke of care, advised to go where it would be safer. Niels always considered him his little brother. He asked Ray to swim upstream and be careful in the rapids. He believed that Ray could handle it. Niels closed his eyes and died, leaving Ray in horror and the bitterness of loss. Rage and despair were the first real emotions Ray felt. Ray sat on the floor and fell asleep. The first rays of the sun illuminated his face, filling it with warmth. He sighed, realizing that he had been asleep for a very long time, reliving the events of the previous day. The memories of yesterday brought back all his emotions, almost as much as they had that time. Something was definitely wrong. He felt something. He noticed the fire in his hand, understanding the connection between rage and the power of magic. The stronger the emotions, the stronger the flame and magical energy felt by Ray. My head ached from the strain and the power accumulated in emotions and magic. He realized that he had overdone it and needed to take a break to gather his strength. Ray considered a plan: leave, get over it, and prepare for revenge. The bodies of his friends lay on the floor, wrapped in blankets, reminders of their losses. He turned around, gathered his will into a fist, and walked forward, deciding to act. It didn't matter whether he would succeed. Determination and anger filled Ray with strength. 17th Street, Central Square. Ray watched Hector's group from around the corner. The men on the street were discussing Hector's group, which had won, and now it would be more difficult for them. His friend calmed him down, telling him that he needed to be quieter, or else he would be killed. Hector's guys stood near the car, Ray glowing red, preparing for an attack and planning his actions. Suddenly someone appeared from behind and grabbed him by the shoulder. He wanted to talk to Ray. Ray turned around, throwing a punch. The man dodged but was hit in the throat. Blood spurted out in a thin stream. Gumpry was surprised by Ray's strength and determination, assessing him as a serious opponent. Ray went on the attack, swinging his knife. Hector's entire group was about to die. The man tried to defend himself with his hands, and Ray left cuts on his body. Gumpry couldn't understand what these crazy movements were. This boy wasn't that strong before, so Gumpry could have lost. Then he had only one way out. Gumpry put his shoulder under the knife, which surprised Ray and changed the course of the fight. Ray froze in bewilderment, having lost his weapon. And then he was thrown to the floor, but continued to remain determined and cool. Gumpry held Ray back, offering negotiations instead of rash revenge. He asked him he wouldn't choose to die from something as stupid as revenge, and he was right. Ray was considered the ghost of 17th Street. His reputation was known to all. Ray stood against the wall, tense, assessing the serious expression on Gumpry's face. Gumpry had been following Ray for a long time and asked him to listen. Silent Gumpry was famous for his silent and precise work. Now he was in despair. It was unlikely that he was going to deceive him. Ray decided to listen to the offer. Gumpry suggested that Ray leave Sector 50, explaining the reason for his request. It was necessary to find Gumpry's younger brother, sold by Hector to the City of Magicians. Gumpry worked for Hector for 10 years for information on his brother's location. Gumpry's brother is now about the same age as Ray. He did everything for him. Ray was surprised by the offer, realizing the complexity and danger of the task. Why should he accept this offer? Gumpry noted that Ray was able to use magic, making him valuable to the mission. He realized it was after their fight in the warehouse, and he had no doubt about it. But Ray's little magic didn't give him any chance of survival against Hector. He couldn't defeat him. Hector always had a mage by his side, one who could cause terror, freeze, or kill. The blue-black mana, speaking of a trembling fear, confirmed Gumpry's words. He considered the mage a demon. Anyone who contradicts him is immediately frozen. He even drowned a guy once by putting his head in a bubble of water. He was a terribly cruel and powerful magician. For now, he had to leave this place. Ray needed to survive to get revenge. Ray decided that Gumpry was right. Ray never learned magic. He just relied on his intuition. On the other hand, his opponent is an expert, so he has zero chance of winning. Gampri explained that the city of the mages was located upstream of the Elton River. It was said that only mages were allowed into that place. He handed Ray the money he had saved throughout his life and a piece of paper with his brother's name and description. Gampri trusted Ray, handing over the bag of money, confident in his abilities. Gampri knew him. He was not one to break his word. He saw how Ray acted and was sure that he would be able to reach the higher sectors. Rhea would definitely cope. Ray paused, weighing the danger and the need to act quickly. Soon other members of the group would arrive on site. A decision had to be made. Ray set a condition. Take care of all the corpses under the bridge. Only then will he find Gampri's brother. Gampri agreed to fulfill the condition, confirming his willingness to help. Ray moved forward, confident of returning and completing his mission. Gampri could only wait. He promised to return and fulfill his plan, heading to his next goal. A sign on the street showed the way. Ray caught his breath after running. He looked back to see if anyone was following him. There was no tail behind him. On the sidewalk ahead sat a woman, the storyteller Viola. Ray dropped a coin into her jar. He was short on time, so he asked her to answer quickly. Viola looked at him, preparing to answer what question had brought him to her. Ray remembered the previous story about the rainbow. He wondered if it was true. He heard that if you find the end of the rainbow, you can make a wish. He remembered the past. It was a sunny day. He was sitting on a bench with a boy. He told him about the rainbow. Ray turned to the child, asking what a rainbow was. The child explained that it was a long, multicolored ribbon in the clouds that appeared after rain. He compared the rainbow to a beautifully decorated donut that you took a bite out of. And if you found the end of the rainbow, you could make a wish. It was so cool. Ray remembered the boys asking for donuts and thought about it. The boy was demanding attention in an irritated manner, lightly hitting Ray. Ray didn't listen to him at all. He decided to deal with this tomorrow, receiving blows from small fists. Ray focused on the woman, thinking about the situation and the child's words. Rainbows exist, said the blind woman, but whether to make a wish or not was up to him. Ray looked closely at her pure and calm mana. The purple energy didn't change. It was as steady as ever. Ray couldn't tell if she was lying. He remembered Gumpri's words. The magician was looking for the rainbow here, in these same streets. The mage was trying to find it too, and Ray clenched his fists at the memory. This meant that the mages had clear evidence of the rainbow's existence. Ray knew that if he could find her, he could resurrect the dead. The blind woman continued, her purple mana steady, quiet. The woman did not know the answer to this question. They say that you can make any wish, and it will definitely come true. Thoughts of his friends and all the dead squeezed his heart, quickening his breathing. Viola noted that, however, no one knows where all the rainbows are. Perhaps somewhere very far away. He took a step back, collecting his thoughts, his heart pounding in his chest like a hammer. Ray thanked the woman and carefully walked off the street. Finally, he warned her that she had better leave here. His steps were quiet, almost inaudible in the empty city. He looked up at the sky, wondering where this rare, magical rainbow might be hiding. The edge of the 50th section, 23rd Street. Ray held the piece of paper with Niels's directions in his hands, listening to the streets. This was the exact location indicated on the map. A white car suddenly appeared ahead. Ray recognized it immediately. He came over and checked the sedan that was prepared for the trip. Niels had prepared a 4-seater car for him. Ray reached for the handle of the car. A voice was heard from behind. He had been noticed. It was one of Hector's men. The guy asked him who he was. After a silence, he assumed that Ray was Niels's henchman. He asked if Ray had been ordered to bring the car. The man was holding a syringe and approaching. Where was Niels himself? He asked. Rhea believed that none of Hector's men were following him. There was no time to waste. Ray quickly got his bearings. He grabbed the car handle and opened the door. The guy immediately rushed at him. The attacker tried to hold him back. He grabbed the car door, blocking the door. He was furious, ordering the door to be opened. Ray resisted with all his might. Ray used too much mana. His boost magic was running out. Ray's magical energy began to concentrate. He concentrated and released a red beam from his eyes. The beam hit the attacker. He fell to the ground, and Ray immediately started the car. He stepped on the gas and rushed forward. The speed increased. The defeated enemy was left behind. Ray felt relief. He was finally leaving the 50th sector. The noise of the streets was left behind, new opportunities and the path to the cities of magicians opened up ahead. The car was racing along the river, and the Raven took off from the trash can. Ray stopped at the trunk, opened it, and was surprised by the preparation. Bottles of water and food were neatly packed. There was so much going on there. It's worth noting that Niels was well prepared. The day was drawing to a close, and it would take several days to reach the next sector. Night had fallen. The full moon was reflected in the river. Ray sat by the fire, thinking about his next steps. Once he gets to the sector, he will immediately learn more about magic. Now he understood that there were two types of mana. The red one, ready to use instantly, and the other one, which required mixing colors. They were not easy to manage. If Ray experienced certain emotions, certain types of mana would be attracted more quickly. Emotions accelerated the flow of a certain mana. Rage gave maximum strength, but if you were distracted, the energy would slip away. Ray concentrated, creating energy. A red ball appeared in his hands, but it suddenly disappeared, and Ray became upset. This was his maximum. As soon as he lost concentration on emotions, the mana slipped away. Then Ray decided to try combinations. Multicolored energy emanated from his hands, swirling into a ball. But it didn't last long either. The mana types that couldn't mix destroyed each other. Combining colors required considerable effort, expending not only strength, but also moral resources. There were combinations that worked perfectly, and Ray decided to continue experimenting. It wasn't that important before, but now every minute mattered. He looked at Luna, realizing that he now had a reason to train. The car rushed forward. Morning came. Ray stopped at a large rock, sat down near the car, and drank some water. Night gradually gave way to day, and magical streams of multicolored energy emanated from him. He conducted experiments, testing the power of freezing, and snowflakes appeared in his hand. Then a small hurricane appeared, spinning in his palm. Stones also fell from his hands. Ray decided to leave it at that for now. He trained his mana control, trying to make his movements smoother. If you can keep the mana in the vessel and use it as needed, the process will become more efficient. Like the rings that restricted that mage's magical flow, Ray planned to look for a way in the 49th sector. Sector 50, 17th Street, the area near the bridge. Hector's guys were searching the area, looking for traces of the golem. There were no results yet. The guy asked the magician for forgiveness. If he waited a little longer, they would find the golem, he promised. The magician got out of the car, carefully examining the street. The guy tried to explain, but the magician pointed his cane at him. The magician ordered to take hold of the tip of the cane. The subordinate begged to give him a little more time. The magician was adamant. He didn't like people who didn't understand him. From the touch of his finger to the staff, blue energy appeared, and the guy's hand froze, completely frozen. He screamed in horror and pain, but the freeze continued to expand, engulfing him completely. The others watched in shock. The mage tapped his cane on it, testing its strength, then got back into the car, running over the frozen man. The magician thought he was useless. Suddenly a voice was heard. The guys found something. They noticed traces of a recent battle, a trench under the bridge, the remains of the golem, all that was left of it. He could feel the concentration of mana in the air. He came closer, assessing the remaining magical power. The boy handed the golem pieces to the mage, who thought about it, analyzing the place. High-level magic was clearly used in these ruins, and the concentration of energy at the point of impact was especially strong. The magician looked around, noticing traces of habitation. People lived here, the guy confirmed. Street children and vagabonds used to live here. The environment was favorable for them. When the war began, they left. The mage smiled, thinking that even a vagabond could control magic. His laughter echoed over the deserted street, and the boy stood in bewilderment, watching the magician's actions. The mage stood there, amazed. A stray child had used magic on the streets, and had done it on his own, creating a small but incredibly precise combination of elemental magic among the countless possible ones in this world. The mage thought it was impossible. Probably another mage came here and destroyed the golem. He ordered to sort out what happened. His subordinate confirmed the execution of the order. A thought flashed through the mage's mind. What if the impossible turned out to be possible? This child could be a future archmage, a genius the world has never seen before. Ray stopped in front of the massive castle gates in Sector 49. The stone walls rose high into the sky, reflecting the first rays of the sun. Ray made his way through the streets of Sector 49, remembering the past and conversations with Nilsson in the bar. His homeland is Sector 42. It looks like this place. It was a mess. Nilsson felt the difference between the lower sectors and his. The streets were wider, the buildings were larger and taller. Everything seemed orderly, but at the same time, alive. All the lower sectors are similar to each other. The higher you go up the river, the more noticeable the changes. Sector 49 was huge. He looked around, trying to get his bearings. Boys ran around the square, laughing and playing. There were no golems here, typical of the 50th sector. There were voices all around about the mines. People were drinking and relaxing. The atmosphere was calm. Ray reached 36th Street. There were at least twice as many of them here as in Sector 50. It was necessary to move on. Ray focused on his mission, to search for information about magic, about the rings around the vessel of the magician. This would be the key to his revenge. It was also necessary to look for information about the colors of mana, the city of magicians, and ways of getting money. Ray had Gumprey's money to get him started, but he didn't know how long the journey would take. He noted every store and sign, looking at the people around him and noting details that might be useful. Ray walked up to the Veronica bookstore. Veronica sounded like a person's name. Ray didn't understand what a bookstore was. Memories came flooding back. Nilsson was sitting next to him on the street, writing on a squeak, teaching him to read different words. Nilsson tried to interest him by asking him to repeat after him. So, thanks to Nilsson, Ray could read. Ray walked up to the window. He had never seen anything like it. The space was filled with squares with letters. This at first stunned Ray. Suddenly, he heard a cry from the window. The girl from the store accused him of stealing books and breaking a window. She was beside herself with anger. She told him to get out and asked why he was doing all this to them. Ray understood from the girl's words that these squares were called books. The girl screamed. She wasn't going to repeat it again. Ray tried to understand what was happening, watching her emotions. Red is excitement. Yellow is joy. Blue is discomfort. Dark green is irritation. Ray was surprised how it was possible to feel so many emotions at once. The girl continued to scream. She threatened the adults to come down. Ray thought she was strange. The girl screamed, indignant at the insult. She began to shout something about her grandfather. Not wanting to drag things out, he turned around and left, continuing to move through the streets. Carefully analyzing everything around and remembering details that could be useful on the path to revenge and the search for magical knowledge. Ray walked down the street. There were people everywhere. 3 children were sitting on the floor in front of him. He noted their gaze. They were full of curiosity and thought that for them he was a stranger and, perhaps, a provocateur. Everything around resembled the 50th sector. Night had fallen. His white car was parked on the street. Lying on the seat, Ray thought about the fact that magic had not yet been detected and that tomorrow more areas needed to be examined. Suddenly he heard a sound. There were 4 boys hiding behind the rocks. One was talking about knocking him out and finding the car keys, where there was probably food. Ray knew they would come. He waited for them, and they finally came. 3, thought Ray, but no, there were still 4. Ray was ready. The boys approached the car. They decided to just knock him out for now. He wouldn't even have time to squeak. Ray suddenly struck from the car. One of the boys fell to the ground. The others turned and Ray jumped out, striking at the others. One of them tried to attack, but Ray grabbed the rebar and threw it away. The boy sat down on the floor. He begged him not to come closer. Ray ordered him to grit his teeth. Screams and the sounds of blows were heard. After the fight, the three boys found themselves kneeling in front of Ray. He asked how many streets they owned. They were silent. Ray demanded an answer again. Suddenly Ray struck, very close to the guy's head. He, frightened by the beating, began to speak. He assured that there were only 3 of them. The boy insisted that the streets from 23 to 25 belonged to them. On the yardarm, he saw his feelings of anxiety, doubt, fear. "Lie," said Ray, stepping on his foot. The boy screamed in pain, asking for forgiveness. The others looked at Ray with horror in their eyes. Ray stood before the 3 boys. One of them, stammering in fear, admitted that they had 14 streets, 52 members in all. Their leader, Kedrick, base in an abandoned factory. Ray estimated the number. It was more than he expected. He made the boy raise his head. The boy called himself Nishu. Ray asked about the leader's orders. The answer was expected to beat him up and steal his food. Nishu added that Kedrick sees everything. At that moment, a 4th guy with a knife appeared from behind and jumped on Ray. Ray activated blue magic. The wind and dust blinded the attacker. Ray's 2 blows were precise and lightning fast. The guy fell, clutching his bloody face. Ray, holding him by the hair, said that their leader is not the only one who sees everything. Ray walked through the crowded streets of Sector 49. The people here, like in Sector 50, knew nothing about magic. He thought of the books, filled with all sorts of information, perhaps even magic. A voice was heard ahead. The guys offered to go with them, explaining that they hadn't come to fight. Ray asked if they were with the people who had been looking for him yesterday. They confirmed. He remembered how Ray had beaten Anthony, Horn, and Melber half to death the night before. The guys had appreciated his fighting style. Their boss liked him very much because he fought well. The boss gave him a note and told him to tell him exactly what it said. But none of them could read. They showed Ray a piece of paper. Ray took it and read, "Come work for me and you will never want for food." The guys were surprised that he could read, because they don't teach this on the streets. Ray asked how a leader is chosen. The boy replied, "Through fights, the strongest becomes the leader." Ray approved and led them to the group leader. Kedrick's group's base is an abandoned factory. Ray and the guys were standing at the door. One of the guys opened the gate, and they went inside. The hall was full of people. There was a fire burning in the middle, and chairs were placed around it. Their leader was sitting on one of the chairs. Kedrick realized who was in front of him. He stood up and introduced himself to Ray. Kedrick's ring glowed red as it drained mana. It was the first time Ray had seen an item with so much mana. Kedrick invited Ray to sit down, explaining that he did not see him as an enemy, but as a guest. The guys around him looked at him with suspicion. Ray appreciated that despite his age, Kedrick was already showing leadership qualities and keeping everyone under control. He did everything to show his dominance. The leader said that after seeing Ray in person, he no longer doubts his choice. Ray has nerves of steel. Kedrick asked about Ray's origin. When they learned that he had arrived from Sector 50 by car, everyone was surprised. Everyone started whispering that he was lying. No one had ever heard of people from Sector 50 going up. Some had gone down, and it was a hell of a long way. Kedrick stopped the conversation and noted that Ray was more than suitable for their organization, adding that they planned to join a real organization. Kedrick said that their organization is called the Red Mercenaries, known in the 45th Sector. They plan to join when they reach 66 members. Kedrick noted that joining the group is not difficult, and it is a good chance to increase your status. But Ray said he refused to work for anyone weaker than himself. There was silence in the room. Confused, Kedrick asked again if he had understood correctly. Ray considered him weaker. Ray noted that in Sector 50, the leader was chosen based on strength, not on the ability to talk. Kedrick stood. The red magic of the ring grew stronger. Powerful energy emanated. The guy in the room screamed and rushed forward, but Kedrick grabbed him by the neck, making him cough. Kedrick didn't give him permission not to act, not to speak. He hated being interrupted. The boy asked for forgiveness, but Kedrick was not inclined. Ray watched as the magic came out of the ring. The flow of mana grew stronger, and he realized that Kedrick himself did not control it. The red power of the ring glowed. Reacting to Kedrick's emotions, Ray thought about how to destroy it. Kedrick let go of the guy, who fell to the floor, barely breathing. Kedrick smiled, admitting that he had gotten carried away. The sudden change in Kedrick's expression surprised Ray, the magic weakening for a moment, opening up a gap for attack. Kedrick suggested going back to the conversation. He couldn't remember where they left off. Ray reminded him, calling him weaker. Kedrick stepped closer, the ring's red magic glowing stronger, reacting to his emotions. Ray assessed the situation, watching the ring's reaction and the weakness in Kedrick's control. The guys in the room looked on tensely, their voices confirming their fear and respect for Ray's strength. Ray thought about it, realizing that the ring was empowering Kedrick, but he himself wasn't fully aware of it. Judging by the fact that he didn't react when the mana flow stopped, he himself doesn't know what the ring is doing to him. Everything was approaching a duel for leadership. The energy of magic filled the hall. The tension was growing. Ray suggested that they test which of them was stronger, and if he lost, he would agree to work for Kedrick. Kedrick has set the competition for a week from now. The place will be surrounded by many eyes. The guys from his gang and other groups will be witnesses. The goal is to determine who is stronger and settle the issue of leadership once and for all. Ray thought about Kedrick's ring. He tried to understand its nature and the power it emitted. The question of the ring's origin remained unanswered, but Kedrick hinted that Ray would find out if he could win, but that would not happen. The next day, Ray walked the streets, thinking about the ring. Suddenly, he felt someone's presence behind him and managed to block the stone aimed at him. The boys tried to stop him and prove their superiority. They surrounded him, threatened him, and declared that they were the ones who controlled these streets. Ray didn't lose his composure. He ordered them to fight him, and soon all the attackers were on the ground. Wherever Ray goes, he gets into a fight. He noticed that his reputation had already begun to take effect. Rumors of his upcoming duel with Kedrick had spread. According to the rules, Kedrick's gang cannot attack him, but this does not apply to other groups. He realized that the boy who was calmly walking around the area was now hurting the pride of other groups. Some gangs began to unite to keep an eye on Ray. Despite this, Ray understood that everything was going according to plan, and each victory strengthened his position before the duel with Kedrick. Ray felt his magical power grow. The more he trained his spells, the stronger and more precise they became, and the energy consumption decreased. Experienced battles only strengthened his skills and control over mana. Suddenly, Ray noticed movement in the distance. He ordered him to come out. Philip came out from around the corner. Philip noted his gray hair and expressionless face and asked if he was a hunter. Ray noticed his body was smaller than his usual opponents. The guy looked inexperienced in fighting. It seemed strange. Ray warned that he would have to act decisively. The stranger took off his glasses, surprised. He claimed that he did not want to fight and was not capable of causing harm. Ray asked about the purpose of his appearance. The man introduced himself as Philip and said that he had a proposition for Ray. Ray followed Philip as he walked toward his building near the East Dump. He worked here. Ray was now known as the Hunter. Philip heard a lot of talk about him, and everyone was talking about him. Ray thought to himself, the Hunter seemed to have gotten his nickname from all those fights. Philip opened the doors, letting Ray into the spacious room. Ray was surprised. There was so much space and so many people. It was Philip's hotel. There were about 186 people inside, some of whom were working outside. They all had something in common: survival and work skills, which made them difficult to accept from other organizations. Ray noted that it would not be easy for them to join another organization. They were either too weak or weak. Philip agreed. They had a lot of mines in Sector 49, and it was causing a lot of deaths among adults. This created a lot of work. Shops started hiring children. There are so many of them that even street gangs can't cope. Philip explained the structure of his network. In exchange for a monopoly on the labor force of several groups, he sent workers as needed. He acted as an intermediary, providing housing for a fee. Philip said that he created this system diligently and with great difficulty. Jonathan, who works at the restaurant, showed up. Jonathan replied that everything was fine and no one was bullying him at work. Jonathan handed Philip a bag containing the monthly rent. Philip noted the amount and wrote it down in the ledger. Jonathan left, and Philip confirmed that the rent had been collected. Philip apologized to Ray for not writing down all the data at once. He explained that he kept a ledger of everything related to the hotel. Despite his doubts, he handed the book to Ray to look over the notes, not expecting him to decipher his scribbles. Ray flipped through the pages and saw detailed information about himself. The nickname Hunter. Rumors of origin from the 50th sector. Place of residence near the southern dump. Character and fighting skills. He noted the thoroughness of Philip's observations. He was surprised that Ray was able to decipher his handwriting. Philip admitted that he simply likes to watch people. Ray said that their differences were too great, and that he was difficult to understand. Ray eventually returned the book to Philip, saying that he didn't care, and Philip agreed. Philip led Ray to the door where two men were standing. The men were surprised to see Ray. They had strict rules not to let just anyone in. Philip explained that this was the hunter everyone was talking about and that he had brought him to visit. The boys were shocked. Ray and Philip entered the room. Philip invited them to sit on the sofa and explained that he usually spent time there. Ray noted that at first he thought Philip was a swindler, but Philip noted that he was being honest, putting the money in the safe. Philip stressed the importance of trust and respect in business, noting that money can be re-earned, but respect cannot. Ray noticed the age difference, but focused on Philip's proposal. Ray scared Philip a little, but he had to overcome his fear if he wanted to make money. Philip, his eyes shining, explained that he was offering a profitable partnership, which will become possible when Ray defeats Kedrick and becomes the new leader. There was a brief pause as Ray thought about it, noticing that he had less black mana than before. He was no longer afraid. On the contrary, he felt determined. Ray asked if he was afraid that he would lose. Philip noted that he could not be 100% sure, but Ray's chances were high. Philip had a premonition. He explained that he watches people and notices small details, which helps him understand people. Ray looks down, not into the eyes, but at the shoulder, takes a step with his right foot as he goes around the corner, preparing to meet the enemy. Ray was surprised by such a detailed analysis, thinking that before he had always been taken superficially. Scary, cold, distant, somehow different. Ray decided to focus on emotions other than anger and sadness, thinking about the clues from Philip. Maybe these are clues to his emotions. Philip noticed that Kedrick often gives in to emotions during a fight, and Ray clearly follows the movements of his opponent, which increases his chances of winning. Ray agreed, interrupting Philip, although he had not finished yet. Ray told him to deal with the money himself. Just take it all seriously, Philip noted, which goes without saying. Ray only insisted on his condition, to use Philip's connections to find the right person. Philip nodded, accepting the request. 2 days later, Ray was standing next to his car. One of the guys was fixing the car, asking if it was true that Ray was from Sector 50. The man was amazed at the condition of the car and said that if Ray had crossed the desert in it, he would have believed it. He noted that Philip probably saw something in him, since he rarely calls someone like him. The man asked for a wrench and 6mm nuts. Ray used his strength to lift the tools into the air and hand them to the boy. He was surprised that the objects appeared nearby by themselves. He did not remember that he took everything with him. It was a sunny day. The man finished the job, replaced the coolant, and made sure the engine was in good working order. He admitted that he had smuggled it out of the store, noting its high price. Ray praised him for his excellent work, and the guy said that it was a request from Philip, their savior. The man explained that without Philip, they would not have found work, and therefore do not complain about the salary and conditions. Ray noted that Philip is quite popular. The man handed over the note, saying that Philip had decided to pass it on directly so that he wouldn't have to remember everything. The guy said goodbye and left, waving his hand. Ray looked closely at the note. Earlier, Ray asked for information about the mages in Philip's apartment. Philip replied that he had heard about them and would collect information about anyone who aroused even the slightest suspicion. He promised that it wouldn't take long, smiling, reminding me of his authority. Now. Ray studied the note in the car, noting that he had managed to gather enough information in 2 days. He looked through the list of suspicious people. The baker on 2nd Street, 42. A man carrying a heavy bag with one hand. Andrew on 8th Street, 23, male clerk, ate bread without emotion. Ray decided he needed to make sure and go through the list. A male cook was walking down the street holding 2 boxes filled with food. Ray watched the passers-by and noted that Lennon was not suitable. He didn't even have a ring on his chest. There was one person left. Building 32-1, empty shopping alley. Name unknown, age 30 to 40. He often came up from the subway with food, presumably living there. When the pipe accidentally fell on him, the wind suddenly changed its path and he escaped injury. There was no fear or surprise on the man's face. Ray noted him as a possible mage. Ray stood around the corner, watching the Veronica Library building. 2 guys were standing near the entrance, discussing how they were closed today too. At this rate, they won't open. They were talking about rocks flying every day and were skeptical about how long they could hold out. But they couldn't finish now. They would be paid double if the shop was put up for sale. Ray heard everything from around the corner. One of the guys decided to throw an object up to the 2nd floor, right into the house, to force the residents to move out. He swung a stone and threw it towards the building. A girl looked out of the window. She heard everything. Ray watched what was happening from around the corner. The girl screamed, expressing courage and determination. Her aura glowed yellow, but there was a black mana around her, which spoke of fear. The boys on the street taunted and mocked them, noting that they had no home and nowhere to sleep. The girl tried to stop them, threatening to call adults. One of the guys threw a stone at the wall next to her, which scared her. Everyone knew that she had only children and an old man in her house. They were shouting for her to leave. Another guy threw a rock straight at her, intending to hit her in the face. Ray reacted quickly, but was too late. The stone hung in the air. Everything lit up with a blue glow. The boys were shocked. The stone fell behind them. The girl directed her magic at the stone, demonstrating control over the power. Ray was amazed. A magician appeared in front of him. He watched the boys from around the corner. They were surprised, but thought they were just imagining things. But Ray knew he had definitely seen magic. The girl was crying, screaming, and demanding that they leave. The guys laughed at her, thinking that she was scared and pretending to be tough. They threw 2 stones straight at her. The girl closed her eyes in fear. She couldn't block all the blows. The stone suddenly stopped in midair. Ray used magic. The boys were surprised, thinking about the wind, but the stones returned to them, hitting them right in the face. They tried to scream, but were hit. Ray came out from around the corner holding rocks in his hand. The guys were lying on the ground. The girl was in complete shock. So here they meet, thought Ray. The boys lay unconscious on the ground. The girl thanked Ray, bowing before him. He said it was not necessary, but he had a question. The girl wanted to ask a question too. Ray asked if she was a mage, and the girl asked if he used dark magic. Their eyes met and they were surprised. The girl let Ray into the library. She introduced herself as Veronica. She was the child of the bookstore owner. Ray gave his name. Veronica apologized for the shout, explaining that she mistook him for one of the hooligans. Ray said it was a misunderstanding, and the girl thanked him again for his help. She would have been in big trouble if it weren't for him. Ray noted that he simply wanted to go to the shop to learn more about magic, and was surprised to meet a real magician. Veronica was surprised. People usually liked praise. Ray asked where she learned magic. She explained that she was taught by her grandfather, who was also a magician. Ray asked to meet him. Veronica agreed, saying that they needed to go upstairs and ask him. She noticed a wound on Ray's face and offered to help. Ray pointed out that it was just a cut, but Veronica insisted that if things were left like this, it could fester. She brought her hand to the wound and channeled magic, and the wound instantly healed. Ray was surprised to learn that she used white mana to create healing light, something he himself could not do. No matter how many times he concentrated, he couldn't direct the white mana. White mana responds to a sincere urge, or when someone sacrifices themselves. These emotions were all far removed from Ray. Veronica explained that she used healing magic. She didn't know anything about white mana. Ray remembered the past. He had only heard about white mana from Nelson's stories. He remembered that mana could not be seen even by mages. Veronica didn't understand what he was talking about and asked if Ray meant some kind of restoration element. Ray was surprised. He didn't know what that was. Veronica explained that she had just used one element of restoration in healing magic. Usually one element is used, but more can be added. Ray asked about the number of elements. She replied that there were about 20 natural ones, and if you take into account the enhancement, disruption, regeneration, and others, there are more than 100. Ray realized that he had learned a lot of new things today and wondered if he could learn more if he met her grandfather. Veronica's grandfather was on the second floor and was sick, so he couldn't get out of bed. Veronica asked Ray to wait at the table while she checked to see if her grandfather was awake. The girl quickly ran upstairs, saying that she would be back soon. Ray went to the bookshelves and began to study the books. Among them were Caladric's travel diary, treatises on the interpretation of the unconscious, and the ontological moisture of the human species. Ray realized that the books were very valuable, and if he touched them with his bare hands, their value would decrease. He remembered that the last time he swam, it was raining outside. The bad smell didn't bother him, but he thought that others might not like it. Ray thought about Veronica. He wondered if she had a problem with smells, or if she just pretended not to notice. His attention was drawn to the books on the table. They looked different from ordinary books, more like magazines. Ray studied them carefully, stopping at the section on the division of elements. He read the title of one of the materials, On the Cause of the Spread of Black Rain. This aroused his surprise and interest. Footsteps were heard upstairs. Veronica was going down and did not notice Ray, surprised by his absence. He appeared behind her, which scared her. Ray looked around the store but didn't find any books on magic. Veronica asked if he could read and noted his interest in book titles. Ray confirmed that he had watched them, causing the girl to be surprised by his curiosity. Ray asked about his grandfather, but he was sleeping, so they suggested postponing the meeting until tomorrow. Ray agreed. Veronica wondered why he wanted to meet him so much. It seemed like that was what he wanted from the start. Ray thought for a moment and then replied that his goal was to find the prism. It was a sunny day. The clock showed 16:30. In one of the restaurants, people were sitting at tables and eating. Ray was at one of them. There were 31 tasks on the empty shopping street. The paper with the information spoke about a man of 30 to 40 years old who leaves in the morning at 7 to 8, and he comes back in the evening at 18 to 19 with a bag of food, after which he goes down. What he does is unknown. He lived here across the street. Ray thought about it, hoping to gather more information about magic. Johnny provided the data. The waiter brought the order. He was wearing a badge with Johnny's name written on it. Ray didn't order the food. It was on the house. Johnny pointed out that Ray was known to the kids as a hunter. Ray decided to ask about the stranger. Johnny told about the accuracy of the man's schedule. For the last 3 months of his work, he had seen him come out of the basement at the appointed time. Sometimes he was even surprised when the man showed up exactly at 7 in the evening. Johnny added that thanks to this, he could navigate without a watch. There was a scream from behind. Johnny quickly apologized and walked away, leaving Ray alone. There was about an hour left until 6 o'clock in the evening. Ray began to eat his food, quickly emptying his plate, then thought, looking out the window. Suddenly, he noticed a man with a ring identical to the one he had seen before. He must be a magician. Ray thanked him for the food and ran out of the restaurant. Johnny shouted to come back again. The man left the house for about an hour, during which time it was necessary to find clues. Ray entered the house. The doors were closed. He used mana. Multicolored flashes went to the keyhole, and the door opened. Ray found himself inside and was surprised by his own actions. I needed to focus on finding information about magic. There was a crumpled piece of paper lying near the trash can. Ray remembered Kedrick's words and the man's letters. The Bloodstone, the quest for power, reaching the number 66 orphans. All this was connected with the conditions for joining the organization. Judging by the recording, the person was kicked out of the previous group. Ray felt a strange sensation. His gaze fell on the object on the table. He opened the box and saw red stones. It was the same stone as on Kedrick's ring, the bloodstone from the letter. The mana remained the same, but the stone in space attracted everything to itself. Ray picked up one stone and watched it. When he tried to use magic on the stone, a huge scarlet flame burst out of his hand. It was the most powerful flame he had ever created, and it usually took much longer. Suddenly, he heard footsteps behind him. Ray turned around. The man was standing at the door. Ray realized that less than 15 minutes had passed. The man complained about his forgotten wallet, regretted his own sluggishness, and the fact that he had been kicked out of the organization. He hoped that after the case was completed, he would return back. Ray hid behind the door, watching. Walter planned to buy more food and leave the house less. Ray noted that he was leaving again. Then he noticed that he had forgotten something else. Looking behind the door where Ray was hiding, he remembered about the rat poison. The man thought Ray was hiding and was surprised when he suddenly attacked. He stepped back, holding his face, shocked. Ray was holding a knife. The man was confused. He expected a killer from the organization. But in front of him was a young guy. Blood was dripping down his face, and the man didn't understand how the door had gotten open. Ray continued his attack, but Walter concentrated mana in his hand and stopped the blade to avoid being cut. The man tried to resist, his hand glowing with red magic. The tension grew, everyone prepared for the next move. The man held the knife, marveling at Ray's courage and the strength of his blow. He couldn't understand how the young boy could be so strong. Ray jumped aside. Walter concentrated his mana into his blade hand. The magic protected him from being cut, allowing him to maintain control of the situation and continue his attack. The man took out a sharp scythe and began to strike, deciding at first to spare Ray because he was a child. But then the attack became dangerous. Now he was finished. Ray thought that he too was capable of using similar magic. Ray dodged, concentrating his magic, a red glow emanating from his hand. He held the enemy's scythe with his magic, carefully memorizing the combination of colors he used. To use metallization, a unique magic skill. The man struck. Ray swung the knife, the tip stained with blood. Walter dropped to one knee, covered in wounds. Walter realized that he was right. His boss sent him. He heard about the killer who could copy magic tricks. Ray understood that his goal was to get information without revealing himself, by controlling magic and the situation. The man, surprised by the abilities of his young opponent, admitted that the legendary killer was so young. Ray decided that if he couldn't extract the information, he would destroy the enemy right on the spot. The man laughed, loudly declaring that he would prove to the boss what he was capable of and that he would burn Ray alive. A bright, fiery flame swirled around him, the red mana quickly spreading through his blood vessels thanks to the ring, making the magic especially dangerous. Walter noted that the boss would regret firing him. Ray, focusing all his power, used mana to defend himself, keeping Walter's magic at a safe distance. The man continued to threaten, claiming that Ray had come to take the bloodstone and kill him, and went on a direct attack, demonstrating strength and fury. Ray felt the energy from the ring amplifying Walter's magic, and that any wrong move could cost him his life. The fire surrounded them on all sides, heating up the space, and the tension grew. Every action could be decisive. Ray concentrated and released the multicolored magic. A powerful flash of fire erupted from his hands, instantly illuminating the area around him. Walter stood in the center of the flames, laughing, testing it. Ray immediately created a magical shield, reflecting the streams of fiery energy. But he knew that the shield would not last long. The flames swirled and flared around Walter, making the space dangerous. Ray reasoned that he couldn't get too close. Otherwise, the shield wouldn't save him, and every second of protection was critical. The tension grew, and Walter continued to provoke, trying to throw Ray off balance. Ray concentrated and watched Walter, analyzing his movements and the strength of the fire. Walter increased the flames, hoping to break through the defense. Ray knew the shield wouldn't last long, so he decided to do something else. He created water next to his fist, allowing it to envelop the space around Walter. The water quickly extinguished the fire, and Walter was surprised by the simultaneous use of two types of magic. Ray directed a stream of water at the enemy, completely neutralizing the flames. Walter was confused and partially lost control of the situation. Ray walked down the street, soaking wet, water dripping off him, his nose bleeding from the strain of his magic. The effects of using magic to its fullest were felt acutely. Walter's firepower was incredible, and the mana in the ring flowed smoothly, almost calmly. The speed of color mixing was astonishing. He understood the scale of the enemy's strength. Walter was very strong, and Ray could hardly imagine the power of the man with the monocle. He didn't have enough strength for revenge yet, but the thought of future growth of strength supported him. There were pieces of red stone in Ray's hand, reminders of the battle that had just taken place. If he had known it would turn out like this, he would have taken everything. The next morning, Ray stood outside Veronica's library. The doors were closed, but he walked inside. Veronica was holding a stack of books as she greeted Ray. She noticed that his clothes had changed. A white shirt instead of yesterday's coat. He had gotten rid of it. Ray thought that with the cloak on, his face might be hidden from others, and he might go unnoticed. But in the same clothes, Walter might remember him. The girl said that she told her grandfather about Ray and how he helped with magic, and that he was interested in rainbows. Ray was surprised, clarifying that Veronica hadn't said anything else. But he hadn't told her anything else. Two boys with angry faces were hiding behind the door. Ray and Veronica approached them. The girl explained that these were her younger brothers, whom their grandfather had taken from an orphanage, Molt and Julfin. Ray realized that they, like her, were taught magic by their grandfather. Veronica led Ray to her grandfather, pointing to the door. The old man was sitting on the bed with a book. The girl left at her grandfather's request, leaving Ray alone in the room. Ray sat down across from the old man. Grandpa mentioned wanting to talk and noted that he had heard about Ray helping Veronica against bullies. It was he who should have done it. But as he could see, Ray was no longer in the best condition. Ray replied that it was not difficult. He watched his grandfather carefully, analyzing the colors of his aura. He had 4 rings: red, anger; orange, comfort; yellow, joy; green, shame; blue, indifference; blue, pity. All these colors are very difficult to experience at one moment, but they are as if engraved on his vessel. Ray realized that these colors reflected emotions accumulated over many years, and not ordinary mana. The old man's streams of emotion are difficult to fully comprehend. Grandpa asked Ray what he wanted to know. Ray said that he had been looking for a magician for a long time. Grandfather replied that according to Veronica, Ray himself was also a magician and quite strong. Ray admitted that he didn't know much. Grandpa asked his name and noted that he was clearly not from around here, asking where he was from. Ray thought for a moment and didn't give a direct answer. Then his grandfather suggested playing a game. The winner of each round will be able to ask the loser a question. His hand lit up, and Ray was surprised. Grandfather noted that Ray's quick reaction indicated his keen sensitivity to magic. He asked if he could feel the flow of mana between them. Ray responded in surprise that he could not only feel it, but also see it. Grandfather noticed the change in his expression. His aura had completely changed. He explained that different types of magic require different elements, and when combined, they form new ones. There is now an element of support between them. It maintains consistency and protects against external factors. But that's what makes it the hardest to control. Ray asked about another element. Grandfather was surprised and clarified that Ray felt not one, but two elements. Ray confirmed, yes, two. Ray said he saw gray and dark gray elements, two different shades. Grandpa laughed. He didn't have to go to hundreds of shelters. In his mind, he noted that this boy had immediately identified the elements of support and continuation, something that another magician would not be capable of even in a lifetime. And how cruel it is that he himself does not have long to live, and he is only now meeting real talent. Ray asked what the second element was called. Grandpa replied that it would be boring to tell right away. Let Ray win the game, then he will find out. It's simple. There is a sphere of two elements. You need to pull it towards yourself. The winner is the one who ends up with the sphere. Grandpa explained that he often plays this game with Veronica, and to be fair, he even suggested placing the sphere closer to Ray. Ray thought that defeating such a magician would not be easy, but possible. He agreed to begin. The sphere formed and immediately appeared in Grandpa's hand. Ray was surprised by its speed. Grandpa said that he was the one asking the first question. Who did Ray learn magic from? Ray answered that he learned it himself. Grandpa was surprised again and remarked out loud. Ray asked if it was really that rare. Grandfather said he will answer if he wins. That is also a question, he added. Ray thought for a moment, collected his thoughts, and concentrated his mana. The next round began. The sphere reappeared in the air between him and the old man, shimmering with a soft light. Streams of energy reached out to it from both sides. The room was filled with tension, as if it itself was awaiting the outcome of their confrontation. The grandfather laughed, and Ray noticed in bewilderment that the sphere was back in the old man's possession. The old man explained that he had won again, emphasizing that the outcome was determined not by the number of rounds, but by the ability to manage mana. Ray clenched his fists and thought. He realized that he was only revealing more about himself, but that he would achieve nothing. A thought arose inside me. I need to change my approach. The sphere appeared in the air again. This time, Ray's other hand flared with magic. The old man was puzzled by his actions. Ray's tactics changed. Soon, the ball was in his hand. He noticed that the rules did not prohibit using tricks against the opponent. The old man suggested asking a question. Ray asked what mana was. The old man smiled and replied that mana is the fundamental element that makes up most matter. It cannot be seen or touched, but its movement is manifested through secondary phenomena such as thunderstorms or hail. There are almost no people in the world who are able to sense mana from birth. Grandfather explained that the ability to sense mana in itself does not mean mastery of magic. The ability to feel and the ability to control it lie on completely different planes. Ray clarified whether the talent specifically refers to the ability to manage mana. The old man noted that this was the second question in a row, but pretended not to notice and confirmed it. He explained that true talent lies in the ability to distinguish elements and combine them in the right proportions. The greatest abilities, he says, are usually found in conscious people. And in a sense, magic itself is similar to the science of self-knowledge. There is a saying for good reason. Mana flows to those who are honest with themselves. Ray repeated this phrase to himself, as if trying to feel its meaning. It was time for the next game. The ball was back in Ray's hands, and that surprised him. The support element is considered one of the most difficult to master, but Ray has already tried to control it, relying on observations of its characteristics. When it was Ray's turn to ask a question, he asked about the rings, the very rings that are in the heart of the magician. The old man explained that the rings could be considered vessels that collect mana. Mana from the surrounding space accumulates in them after undergoing purification. Moreover, the distribution of elements inside the rings always depends on the state of the magician himself. Ray clarified whether it was true that purification was only needed to make it easier to manage mana. Grandfather shook his head and said that there was an even more compelling reason. Using raw mana directly can be done once or twice, but doing so continuously will result in magic poisoning. Its effects manifest themselves differently for everyone. Some people feel sleepy or dizzy, while others suddenly cannot stop laughing, crying, or screaming. It also happens that all this develops into the strongest anger. Thus, the rings not only make it easier to work with magic, but also protect the magician from the destructive influence of raw mana. Grandpa nodded, agreeing with Ray's reasoning, and continued to explain. If the symptoms of magical poisoning accumulate, then it can really lead to serious mental disorders. This is why mages are so careful and strive to use only purified mana. Ray was amazed. For the first time, he thought about the fact that mana itself directly affects a person's emotional state. It turned out that unrefined mana could drive a mage completely mad. Then it became clear why he himself did not experience such symptoms. His own indifference, his complete lack of reaction to any changes inside, seemed to protect him from poisoning. He shared this thought out loud. If there was a person who could freely use mana from thin air without consequences, it would be an incredible advantage. There is an endless sea of mana around, much more than in any rings. The old man smiled and agreed, noting that such a man would be incomparably stronger than most magicians, limited by the need to filter and protect their rings. However, he admitted that he had never encountered such a phenomenon in his entire life. For him, it remained only a theoretical possibility. And for Ray, it was becoming an increasingly obvious reality. Grandpa asked Ray if he had a dream. Ray asked, "Is it something you see in your sleep?" But he wasn't talking about dreams. He was talking about how he saw his future. Ray had several wishes. He wanted to kill some people and save some. Grandfather noted that he had often heard people say something like this, but this was the first time he had been told the essence of it in plain text. The mage asked Ray if he wanted to learn magic from him. Ray was dumbfounded why a mage with 4 rings wanted to teach an orphan from the streets. He didn't understand his goals. He probably needed something. But his grandfather, as if reading his thoughts, noted that he didn't ask for anything in return. Ray agreed. Grandpa smiled. Veronica was standing outside the door, and Grandpa asked her to come in. She noted that she had not been eavesdropping. But he knew it very well. He knew very well what kind of person she was. He asked her to sit down. They sat down by the bed, listening attentively. Grandfather took Molta, Julfina, and Veronica from the orphanage to leave his knowledge as a legacy. And now I wanted to share another piece of knowledge, so I warned you to listen carefully. He knew that Ray was looking for a rainbow. Stories about rainbows have been passed down from mouth to mouth since ancient times, and even today, many travel the world in search of this miracle. There are many theories floating around, the grandfather continued. They all agree on one thing. Whoever finds the rainbow can become a godlike being. Ray was surprised. Grandpa, who is this? Veronica asked. Simply put, it is an all-powerful entity capable of anything. Now it's clear why that magician with the monocle was looking for a rainbow, Ray thought. Grandpa, it turns out it's a rainbow, Veronica said. But she didn't have time to finish the sentence. The window shattered. A rock flew into the room. Ray reacted instantly, raised his hand and stopped it right in front of Veronica's face. The girl recoiled, frightened, her eyes wide open. Ray felt the pain coming through his hand. Blood was flowing from his fingers. The shards of glass hovered in front of Veronica's face. She realized that it was wind magic. Ray thought about it. He remembered warning the guys on the street, but they weren't going to back down. 2 guys were running down the street. Grandfather watched Ray with gratitude. He felt a lack of strength, although he knew he had to act. Veronica came over and used magic, healing the wound on his arm. The wound would heal soon. Ray thought it was just a scratch. Veronica's eyes were filled with tears. She warned that without treatment, there would be a scar. Ray thought that scars were marks of honor, memories of enemies. Grandfather warned Veronica not to use magic before creating the circle, as she had already used up a lot of mana from the space. She agreed. Veronica was cleaning up the shards from the floor. Ray noted that the boys had been bothering them for a long time. It had been going on for about a month, apparently. It was someone's request. The grandfather explained that someone had been trying to buy the shop for a long time and had probably given the order to throw stones. Ray asked if they were planning to sell the shop. They hadn't planned to do so yet, but it was getting complicated. Grandpa remembered opening a bookstore 6 months ago. He wanted to teach students and finish the book he had been working on all his life. Veronica tugged his hand and congratulated him, handing him a bouquet of flowers. Grandfather accepted the gift with a smile. He liked living like this, seeing children and customers, enjoying books. Because of his illness, Veronica began to look after the shop. He knew that if something happened to him, the shop would become an easy target, and the children would have to find a new place. Veronica furiously demanded that the store not be sold. She reminded him of her grandfather's childhood dream, a bookstore. Grandpa thanked her for her concern, explaining that things don't always go according to plan. Veronica didn't want the store to close and cried, afraid of losing her grandfather. Tears welled up in his eyes. He admitted that he had put too much pressure on her. Ray watched them, thoughtful. It was raining black outside. Grandpa remained in bed, stricken with a rare disease of eternal sleep that began 2 months ago. The periods of wakefulness were reduced to 2 to 3 hours a day, with sleep getting longer each day. Veronica sat on the floor next to Ray and explained the situation. She suggested coming tomorrow, noting that grandfather usually doesn't sleep in the mornings. As she said goodbye, Veronica noted that her coat fit Ray's size. She saw him off. Ray remembered the children who were crying and wondered how one could help a person without understanding someone else's sadness. He knew a few words and actions of support. He told her not to worry, noting that everything would be fine. Veronica was surprised and grateful, wiping away tears. Ray went outside and walked through the alleys, thinking about the kids and the Jeffers gang that owned 8th Street. He assumed that all the children had returned to shelter because of the black rain, and that plans for dealing with Jeffer would have to be changed. Ray ran through the streets, thinking about his next plans. He was going to find Philip first. He had connections with various groups and could help arrange a meeting with Jeffer. Suddenly, people in cloaks appeared ahead. Ray hid behind the wall, watching carefully. It was Kedrick's gang, and he was trying to figure out what they were doing there. The guys were discussing the boss, who didn't sleep until the morning, until he finished his business. And Ray listened to them, realizing that Kedrick and Philip were in the container. In the container, Kedrick held Philip on his lap, screaming and expressing contempt. Suddenly the doors swung open, and Kedrick was surprised to see Ray standing in the doorway. All his subordinates were lying beaten in the street. Ray entered the bunker and was surprised by Kedrick's reaction, who pointed at Philip, who was covered in blood and lying on the ground. Ray looked closely at Philip, who was unconscious. He realized that although he did not owe him a loyal partner, Philip had helped him, and the debt must be repaid. Ray stood in front of Kedrick, shielding Philip with his body, deciding to follow his principles. Kedrick noticed Ray's lack of patience and spoke of a duel scheduled for tomorrow, but Ray remained silent. The mana in his vessel and ring increased, felt stronger, as if he was becoming stronger without removing the ring. Ray didn't come to fight, but to find out what happened to Philip. Kedrick was surprised to hear the question and accused Philip of looking for Ray and planning to make some strange deal. Kedrick showed contempt for Philip and rushed towards him, but Ray grabbed Kedrick and pushed him aside. Kedrick landed on his feet, barely holding on, his fist glowing red. Kedrick swung, but Ray held his fist, squeezing it in his hand. Kedrick was amazed at Ray's strength. He pulled his hand back, explaining that the week filled him with disgust and contempt. Ray noted that this is no reason to hurt others. Kedrick slammed his fist into the wall, causing cracks to form, and threatened Ray, pointing out the consequences of interfering with his territory. Ray pondered the situation, thinking that using the gemstone could easily resolve everything, but the side effects remained unknown. Kedrick was trying to figure out what better option Ray was talking about, and Ray was confirming that there was a more effective way to set an example. Kedrick thought about Ray's words, imagining the moment when Philip would be defeated in front of others. Ray discussed with Kedrick how acting in front of witnesses would make him more effective and scary. Kedrick smiled, imagining himself above Philip, while the other strongest watched the proceedings. The date of the duel was a decisive moment. All the strongest 49 sectors would be present and watching. Kedrick was worried about Philip escaping, but Ray assured him that everything was under control. Kedrick trusted Ray, believing him to be a man who was responsible for his words and actions. But if Philip escapes, or Ray lets him go, it will be up to him to take his place. After Kedrick left, Ray stayed by Philip's side, checking his condition and the severity of his wounds. Philip just groaned. Ray realized that he was worse than expected. The tension did not go away. Philip's base. It was raining outside, black drops hitting the windows, when a sudden knock came from the door. They were closed when the black rain fell. Jonathan was surprised by the late guest and slowly opened the door, assessing the strange situation. His gaze fell on Ray, who was holding a bloody Philip on his shoulders. The chaotic rain reflected in the puddles, adding to the horror of the moment when Ray appeared on the doorstep. Jonathan froze, a sense of unease growing as he realized the seriousness of what was happening. Tensed and silent, Philip breathed heavily while Ray sought Jonathan's help. The rain continued to fall, drumming on the roof as Ray sat in a chair in the hallway, lost in thought. Philip woke up, weakly opening his eyes, and slowly realized that he was in a room. Ray sat by the bed, assessing his condition and noticing with relief the improvement after the incident. Philip knew that he had been carried here on his back. He did it, moving his arms with difficulty and looking at Ray. There was a silent understanding between them that Philip had remained alive despite the danger. Philip's memory of Kedrick's sudden attack appeared. The events seemed unreal. Philip explained his motives, thinking about how to prepare the children for a safe part of the street. He went to scout the area. Ray marveled at the courage of Philip, whom he considered a coward. But now he saw determination. Philip acknowledged fear, but noted that sometimes it must be overcome for the sake of benefit. Ray pondered Philip's motives, noting that his pursuit of gain was more rose-colored than golden. The idea of money and interest in it seemed strange to Ray, raising questions. He tried to understand why Philip was so persistent in raising funds and taking risks. Philip's memories of his friendship with Kedrick floated through his mind. They had been friends in early childhood. Ray realized that past relationships explained much of Philip's behavior. Philip calmly admitted that he had not hidden anything. His actions were open and thought out. They used to be weaklings wandering the streets until they found solid ground under their feet. Philip found the hotel, happily realizing that they now had a place they could call their own. Kedrick was silent. His discontent and hidden anger were felt in every movement. He did not want to be a rat and hide. Philip tried to understand Kedrick, but he was always obsessed with training after work. 6 months later, Kedrick left the hotel, leaving Philip immersed in his own habits. Kedrick was constantly getting into street fights, losing his mind and balance despite his training. Ray noted that training alone could not compensate for the difference in physical strength. Philip understood that Kedrick always lost. His strength was not enough against street kids. The situation suddenly changed. Kedrick became incredibly strong and confident in street fights. Ray noticed the ring on Kedrick's hand, remembering his sudden strength after leaving the hotel. That could explain everything. Philip explained that Kedrick only wears the ring after he becomes the leader of the gang. He had no interest in such things before. The cruelty came later, after the streets. Kedrick kept his distance from Philip, ignoring any attempts at contact, his gaze full of contempt. Philip understood that his former comrade had changed greatly. Ray reflected on the pink hue of Philip's soul, associating it with sadness and melancholy. Kedrick's chance encounter with the man from the basement could explain the sudden power and the ring. Ray offered Philip a chance to talk to Kedrick, remembering their past friendship. Philip was surprised but thoughtful, admitting that he would like reconciliation if possible. Ray promised that after the fight, there would be an opportunity to meet Kedrick in person, so I needed to go there with him. Philip immediately realized that he could not get there himself. The restrictions were too strict. Entry was only allowed to those associated with the three great gangs: Jeffer, Kedrick, and Lot. Philip felt torn between his desire to meet his friend and the reality that forbade it. The feelings were mixed: hope for a meeting and disappointment from the inability to get inside. Internal tension increased as fighting became the only opportunity for contact. Ray assured Philip that he would bring him with him to ensure his safety and a chance to meet Kedrick. Philip was surprised at how far Ray was willing to go for him, knowing the risk of the situation. Ray noted that losing the fight would result in Philip being publicly executed in front of all the gangs. Philip was embarrassed, realizing the danger, and was surprised at Cedric's cruelty in case of defeat. Ray clarified that the loss would be painful. These were not jokes, and there would be no leniency. Philip felt fear, but he understood that next to him was his protector and executioner at the same time. Ray placed his hand on Philip's shoulder, calming him down and assuring him that he would not allow his friend to die. Ray realized that a debt or obligation to him would ensure help in the future. Inner tension and trust were intertwined when Philip agreed to go to the fight with Ray. Ray reflected on the fact that he had managed to win Philip over. Considering it a good decision, he understood that there was one more important action to be taken at the scene. Philip thought, realizing that this was the second condition he would have to accept. The silence and tension emphasized the importance of the decisions and actions ahead. Ray and Philip's inner thoughts created a sense of a strategic game and upcoming challenges. Philip was taken aback by Ray's joke, realizing that the proposal was fraught with risk and fear. Ray reminded that fear can be overcome if there is an opportunity to benefit. These were his own words. Philip saw this as a business proposition and a chance to make money despite the danger. Two great gangs, Jeffer and Lotson, are sure to emerge, attracting huge amounts of money and attention. Everyone would gather in one place, which created a tense atmosphere and a sense of potential threat, but also benefit. Philip doubted that he would be able to get out alive even if Ray's plan worked. Evil bandits could turn the attempt into a real massacre, threatening the lives of both. Ray insisted that the main goal was to defeat Kedrick, and the rest would not be a problem. The internal tension grew, combining excitement, danger, and strategic calculation. Ray and Philip's eyes met, tension and trust palpable in the silence. Philip opened the nightstand and handed Ray a paper, causing him to be surprised. The document symbolized trust and a willingness to work together, like a business agreement. The contract was the first step towards joint action, emphasizing the seriousness of intentions. The moment was filled with anticipation and a sense of responsibility for further events. 2 days later, Sector 49, South Dump, Kedrick Arena, the crowd gathers. The day of the battle has arrived. Ray enters the arena, standing opposite Kedrick, surrounded by fiery torches and chanting spectators. People discuss Ray's arrogance, doubting that an outsider is capable of defeating the gang leader. In a separate room, the gang leaders sit and watch what is happening. Kedrick stands confidently. The public puts money on him, 10 and 30,000 shillings. The crowd is guessing who will win. Some see a chance for Ray, but most are confident in Kedrick. The guys in the audience realize that if Kedrick wins, the stakes and chances for them will disappear. At this rate, they will not earn anything. Others come not for the money, but to see an outsider fight an arrogant leader. The atmosphere is tense. Every breath and glance heightens the sense of an impending battle. Ray notices the colors red and gold, symbols of excitement, greed and tension growing in the arena. Kedrick noticed that Ray had come alone, reminding him of the agreement they had reached earlier. Ray assured him that Philip would come, and soon a man in a wheelchair appeared on the doorstep. The crowd recognized Philip, surprised by his appearance with a suitcase in his hands. Spectators discussed the possibility of the hotel guys intervening, but they would probably be afraid to take the risk. Kedrick introduced Philip as a special guest, adding to the tension before the fight. Kedrick noted that he came up with a fun show to entertain everyone after the fight. Philip and Kedrick exchanged a brief agreement, showing mutual respect and strategy. Ray watched the stage, taking in the crowd's reactions and the actions of both of them. Philip and Ray's eyes met, adding to the atmosphere of unity and impending play. Kedrick gave the command to begin, but Philip expressed a desire to place a bet, adding intrigue. Philip opened the suitcase and placed a bet of 2,240,000 shillings on Ray, shocking the audience. His smile and determination added to the element of surprise, creating tension in the room. Ray recalled their previous conversation, confirming his agreement to take the risky bet. Everyone expected to bet on Kedrick, the greed of the crowd pushing the bets towards the leader. Philip realized that his big bet on an outsider would change the dynamics and cause a chain reaction. The crowd ran up to the bookmaker, throwing money, confirming their trust in Kedrick, and the excitement of the game. A chance to hit the jackpot appeared. The bookmaker was literally torn to pieces, with money thrown at him. Kedrick noticed Ray and Philip's influence on the bets, his smile showing the strategic advantage. The fight was filled with greed, risk, and anticipation as everyone watched the stakes change. Kedrick screamed the bell as he prepared to attack, raising his fist and shouting, "Die!" Ray dodged the blow, noticing that Kedrick had become even faster and more dangerous. However, he realized that Kedrick would hardly be able to cope with Gumpree's physical strength. Ray grabbed Kedrick's arm, intending to break it in one motion, but he jumped back. Kedrick laughed, acknowledging Ray's fighting ability and building up the excitement for a fight to the death. Their eyes met, tension and danger in the air, foreshadowing a fight. The moment highlighted the speed, strength, and strategy of each fighter in the arena. The atmosphere was tense as the crowd awaited the outcome of the deadly duel. Kedrick went on the attack. The crowd cheered, watching the deadly duel with Ray. Ray deftly grabbed Kedrick's leg and swung it, demonstrating strength and speed. But Ray missed. Kedrick managed to dodge. The crowd discussed their audacity, and Philip thought that the fighters were ready to turn everything into ashes. Fiery torches flared up all around, creating a sense of chaos and intense combat. Kedrick attacked with his leg. Ray dodged, realizing that meeting the blows directly was a waste of time. First, he needed to knock him down. Ray lunged at Kedrick, slamming his body right into his stomach, surprising his opponent. Kedrick tried to break free, but Ray held him tightly, demonstrating control and strength. Kedrick felt the impact and was thrown back into the fire barrels. The crowd admired the fighter's power, amazed by Ray's incredible strength. Philip was shocked that this guy could be so strong. People thought it was unrealistic. The hunter was better than they expected. Kedrick didn't get up. He could have lost anyway. Kedrick was lying on the floor, but slowly got up, shouting that he would never lose. Ray watched every move carefully, assessing Kedrick's capabilities and strategy. Every one of his blows was powerful. At this rate, they would never finish. Kedrick screamed and rushed at Ray, swinging his fist but missing, amazed at his opponent's speed. Ray realized that the fight would not end easily, dodging and putting up a defense, crossing his arms. Weight was usually the deciding factor in a fistfight, Ray thought as he assessed the difference in strength. Kedrick threw a punch straight at the chest, but Ray crossed his arms to block the blow. He completely blocked the impulse with a protective barrier. Kedrick smiled, showing his confidence and enjoyment of the fight. Ray realized that it was impossible to completely defend against Kedrick's power, and he looked for a strategy. He remembered Nelson's words about gripping as a way to overcome the weight difference. The thought of capture gave Ray hope to find a weak spot and continue the fight. Kedrick lunged at Ray with a punch to the stomach, but Ray jumped up and wrapped his legs and arm around his torso. Ray grabbed Kedrick by the throat, holding him down as he screamed and tried to break free. Ray asked him to give up and accept defeat. The ring on Kedrick's finger glowed red, surprising Ray and adding to the tension of the fight. Ray demanded surrender, and Kedrick resisted, his body weakened by the pressure and strength of his opponent. Ray knew that this would only destroy his own body. Kedrick collapsed to the floor, Ray standing over him, removing the shining ring from his finger. The crowd watched in shock as Kedrick was defeated, realizing that the gang's leader was now the hunter. The men discussed their bets, realizing that they had lost money due to Kedrick's defeat. Hunter was now the leader of the gang. Ray reflected that the amount of the loss was enormous, and Kedrick would be immobilized for several more weeks. Philip, approaching him on a gurney. Ray informed Broker that he would hold the bet until the end of the fight, surprising those present. Kedrick rose from the ground, angry and furious, shouting that the fight was not over yet. He could not lose. He was not weak. A can flew from the audience straight at Kedrick's head. The crowd expressed anger and disappointment. People condemned him, crying about the lost money, but Kedrick refused to admit defeat. A million eyes were watching him, and he tried to fight back. Kedrick grabbed a burning log and threw it into the hall, threatening to kill everyone. Philip warned from behind, but Kedrick rushed into the crowd, threatening everyone present. Chairs caught fire and the crowd panicked, screaming and trying to escape from the mad leader. People were screaming and running. The hall was engulfed in flames. Everyone was trying to find a way out as quickly as possible. Kedrick laughed. Now no one would look down on him, but suddenly he fell to the ground. The magic in him went out, depriving him of strength and control. Ray watched carefully, realizing that Kedrick was no longer able to move. If they tried to save him, both he and Philip would be in danger. Ray turned to leave, but suddenly heard a voice from behind. Philip leaned over to Kedrick, beginning to help him despite the danger of the fire around him. He held Kedrick close, trying to pull him out of the burning hall, rushing to save his life. He had to hurry. Ray asked if Philip was going to take Kedrick in a wheelchair, assessing the risk. Philip was surprised by Ray's presence. He thought he would leave immediately, trying to understand his motives, given recent events. Ray wondered why he was helping the man who almost killed him a couple of days ago. Philip would seat Kedrick in the wheelchair and ask Ray to help, creating a tense sense of trust. Kedrick sat unconscious in the wheelchair. Ray didn't know what to do next. Philip told them to take Kedrick and leave, allowing them to take his share of the winnings. Ray wondered what Philip himself would do, given the danger of the situation. Philip noted that it was difficult to bear two people at the same time, but everything was fine. He clarified that the main thing is to save lives, even at the cost of one's own safety. Even though his own life should be the most important thing, he did it. Ray remembered Nielsen, who sent him to a better place. Ray asked why he would risk his life for Kedrick. What would he get out of it? What was his gain? He was good at calculations. But that wasn't the point. He didn't think before he did it. Ray didn't understand the motive. Philip simply replied, "Kedrick is his friend, and he wants to protect him." Ray was surprised by this action, considering the risk excessive. It was strange. How could you risk your life for your friends? Ray recalled the children's words of friendship and care, sharing food and support. They treated him because they were friends, mended his clothes. The girl added that she simply suggested how best to act, helping a friend. I remembered what Nielsen had said. He helped because Ray looked like his little brother. It was nice to have a little brother. They didn't spare expensive medicines for Ray. Pei said that saving a life is a natural duty, because when a person dies before your eyes, it's natural. Pei repeated that he did it simply to save her, and was ready to do it again because they were friends. Ray remembered the words of all his friends, realizing that friendship was more important than calculation. Ray wondered if he could reach out and achieve true understanding, he wondered. He doubted that he could, but still thought that it would work if someone helped. Philip asked Ray if he would help, realizing the danger around him. Ray noted that it was too late to leave. The flames were everywhere. It was better to stay. The fire could not reach the arena center. Ray started to take off his shirt. Philip was shocked, asking what he was doing, thinking that he had inhaled smoke and gone crazy. The shirt tore into pieces, and magical power came out of it, surprising Philip. Philip asked about magic, Ray confirmed, holding out a wet rag to avoid inhaling the smoke. It was necessary to cover her mouth and nose. When Ray asked Philip to learn about mages, he honestly thought it was useless, not even expecting that something like magic existed in the world. Philip remembered his doubts about magicians. He understood that magic exists and can be useful. He understood that if you can create water, you can put out fire. But magic required strength. There was a limit to the use of magic, and Ray was getting tired from creating magic for a long time. Ray said he would answer all the questions later, but now it was important to answer his questions. He asked Philip what a friend meant to him. Philip was surprised, but Ray insisted on the importance. Philip reflected on friendship, noting that a friend is a friend, but his and Ray's concepts are different. Ray considered a friend to be someone he had known for a certain amount of time. Ray asked Philip what a friend meant to him, and he tried to explain his feelings. Philip thought about the strange feeling he had had while working with Ray, wondering. He noted that Ray was right, but he was missing something in trying to reveal the true meaning of friendship. Philip explained that a friend is someone who helps without asking for anything in return. And the one you help in return is also a friend, Philip emphasized. This is a friend. Ray asked Philip if he regretted his decision, knowing that they were risking their lives. Philip did not regret, remaining true to his feelings, which told him that he must take care of Kedrick. He understood that he was the one who had to protect him, simply because it was Kedrick. The desire to protect was unconditional. Philip explained that he wanted to protect him, just like that. Ray was surprised by such a desire to protect, not fully understanding Philip's motives. Suddenly the beams began to fall. The roof collapsed, posing a threat to both of them. Philip was struck by the scale of the danger, realizing that there was no way back. Ray thought that this time he might really die. It looked like he wouldn't get out of it this time. He remembered that terrible night when he thought only of revenge for the children. He had one thought: to kill the golem. Because the children died, and he did not have time to repay their kindness. He wondered if that was all that connected him to them. No, it wasn't just that. And now he was sure of it. The sticks fell right on them, but Ray concentrated magic in his hand, preparing to protect. He remembered everyone and the time they spent together. He created a dome over himself and Philip, surprising Philip with the power and strength of magic. Ray thought about his desire to protect his children and their life together, trying to preserve everything important. Philip was shocked to see Ray's action as he raised his hand and all the beams stopped. He was surprised that this was also magic, not believing that such a thing was possible. Ray himself was amazed that his action worked, without expecting a result. He told Philip not to move so that the magic would work accurately. Philip was surprised, trying to understand why he had to remain still. He began to suspect that Ray was healing his wound, amazed by what was happening. Ray brought his hand to Philip's broken leg. White magic came out of it. Philip was amazed to see his broken leg instantly heal. The moment highlighted the power of Ray's magic and Philip's amazement at the miracle. Ray channeled magical healing power into Philip's hands, and they began to heal. Philip was grateful, remembering how Ray saved him and Kedrick. Philip promised that he would never forget his kindness and that he helped him and Kedrick. Ray noted that he was always happy. Ray thought about the future benefits of helping Philip and testing the limits of white mana. Philip asked what to do next. Ray suggested getting out of here while maintaining the protective field. Philip asked if Ray would use magic again, but Ray denied it. They would just wait until everything burned out. Kedrick remained unconscious, the flames around him destroying everything in their path. People on the street watched, discussed how everything had burned to the ground, and who was to blame, and what they should do now, where to go. A crowd of people from other gangs blamed Kedrick and left the consequences to others. He was the one who set everything on fire. This did not concern the other leaders, so they left, suggesting that they sort it out themselves. The people of Kedrick considered them vile. Jonathan cried as he remembered leaving Philip with a broken leg, kneeling and wiping tears from his eyes. The building was all in black smoke. There was no chance of salvation. Jonathan looked into the darkness. Ray emerged from the smoke, unharmed, surprising everyone on the street. "This can't be," the people cried. "The hunter is alive. He got out of that fire alive." Philip and Kedrick followed him in a carriage, to the admiration of the crowd. Ray threatened the attackers, demonstrating his strength. He warned them that if they were going to attack, then they should all attack at once. All at once. He would have dealt with them all at once. Everyone was stunned. Everyone fell to their knees without moving. He stood in front of them, looking them straight in the eye, asserting his superiority and control over the situation. It's a sunny morning at Philip's base. The children are gathered at the windows, surprised by the appearance of Kedrick's gang and Philip. The doors were closed, and Ray appeared on the threshold with Philip and a stroller in which Kedrick was. A crowd of Kedrick's gang followed them, causing tension among the watching children. Ray ordered everyone to stay put until they were given permission. Philip asked Ray to wait a minute, surprising him with his request for a short break. Philip turned to Jonathan, inviting him to join them. But he admitted that he had abandoned Philip and run away, apologizing for his fear and actions. He could not dare to enter the hotel after that. Philip noted that there was no problem with this. In his place, he would have done the same. Philip forgave him, hugged him, and explained that everything was fine. He didn't blame him. This was their common home. Jonathan tearfully explained that he ran away because he was very scared. Philip asked Ray to let Jonathan come with them, to which Ray thought about Philip's right to the hotel. It was strange that he asked him for permission. Ray agreed. Philip thanked him, calling him generous, causing Ray to be surprised. People in the crowd were surprised. Hunter runs a hotel and took back the guy who dumped him. Maybe they'll get something too. Philip smiled, looked back at the crowd. The doors opened, and they walked inside with Kedrick in the wheelchair. People asked Philip how he felt after the duel and victory over Kedrick. Philip said to take care of the wounded man first, leaving the rest for later. The children were amazed, watching what was happening, and looked worried. Kedrick had been dealt a good blow, which was deserved. He looked like a cutlet about to be fried in a frying pan. Philip noted that Kedrick looked very bad, asking everyone to disperse and wait for an explanation. The infirmary was on the second floor, and Philip wondered how to get Kedrick there. Ray picked Kedrick up and walked forward. The crowd stood still, watching. The doors to the infirmary opened, and Ray carefully laid Kedrick down on the bed, ensuring his safety. Philip sat down opposite Ray and asked about what he saw during the fight, being interested in magic. Ray thought for a moment, then confirmed that he could use magic, explaining what had happened. Philip realized that Ray didn't like to talk about himself, and there was no point in pressuring him. He would slowly get information out of him. Ray said that they needed to sort out the money, reminding him of the bet. Philip noted that the total bet was 4.24 million shillings. Ray showed Philip his share, surprising him with the accuracy and speed of the calculation. Ray asked for one more favor. Ray clarified that his gang's hideout had now burned down. He asked Philip to find a new place and buy everything for the arrangement. He offered him his share and noted that if that was not enough payment for his services, he should just say so. Philip promised to help with finding shelter and even buy furniture and everything needed for a normal life. But he refused to take the money, considering the distribution to be wrong, emphasizing Ray's merit. Ray was surprised, not understanding why Philip did not want to take the share. Philip emphasized that he had calculated the share incorrectly. His share should be much larger. Everything that happened today happened only because of him. Ray didn't understand what was wrong with him and asked him to just take the money. But Philip couldn't. Ray didn't understand him. Philip started to think he was angry. Philip felt fear and anxiety inside, a combination of gold and white mana. Ray asked if he was worried about him. Philip froze, surprised by his feelings. Philip thought that he was the strongest in Sector 49, so he should worry about those that Ray could defeat. Philip said he wasn't worried about Ray, he just wanted to split the money properly. Ray didn't see how this would benefit Philip, wondering at his motivation. Philip suggested that this be viewed as an investment in Ray and his future, with the expectation of some return on capital in the future. He explained that this money would help Ray's gang become stronger. The area would become calmer, and the hotel would operate more stably. Ray understood, accepted Philip's explanation, and agreed to move on. Suddenly, one of the guys shouted, running into the room about the problem. Jeff and Lotson had arrived with all their men. Philip and Ray turned around, alarmed by the news. Philip noted that Zephyr and Rodson did not recall all the people, and left observers at different points. They must have found out about the betting money, Philip thought. Ray knew about it. He saw the surveillance. Philip wondered why Ray hadn't stopped them earlier. Ray explained that they would have to face both gangs sooner or later. Philip reminded them that they had just won the fight. Ray said the investment would pay off and dividends would come soon. The doors opened. A voice from the crowd confirmed that they had survived. The rumors were true. The gang leaders were amazed that he survived the flames, and dozens of people were injured. The bandits asked if they had set the factory on fire on purpose to take the money. They suggested not to deceive each other. Zephyr demanded that they give him all the money, promising to leave after that. Philip thought it was nonsense. Ray agreed, letting them take the money. Ray put his hand in his pocket, pulled out a gold coin, and threw it at the feet of the bandits. He showed that this was their lot, demonstrating control over the situation. Zephyr expressed his displeasure, calling Ray a bastard. Ray pointed out that if they wanted to take the rest of the money, they should take it by force. That's how it works on the streets. Ray told Philip to go to the hotel. Philip nodded and ran, hurrying to get away from danger. One of the bandits shouted that they needed to take the money and prepared for a conflict. Zephyr and Roston jumped on Ray, attacking him with full force and fury. Ray thought about his not-so-best form, but the ring in his hands gave him an advantage. He put the ring on his finger and struck at the bandits' weapons, breaking sticks and rebar. The bandits were shocked, not expecting such strength and skill from one person. Zephyr was amazed, not understanding how this was possible. Ray grabbed them by the heads and slammed them into the ground. They fell flat. He was in control. The crowd watched, stunned by what was happening, appreciating Ray's strength. Ray addressed the crowd, asking if they would attack, testing their reaction. Everyone froze. The tension reached its peak. No one dared to move. The crowd began to shout, calling Ray a bastard, and rushed at him en masse. Ray used magic through the ring and pushed the entire crowd away, causing them to scream in horror. The bandits attacked, swinging their weapons, but Ray delivered precise blows, breaking their attacks. People screamed in shock about Ray's incredible strength, wondering why he was still on his feet. The crowd discussed Kedrick, acknowledging his selfishness and defeat to the hunter. Some felt relieved that the hunter had defeated Kedrick and could become the new leader. It irritated the hell out of everyone when he threw tantrums at the slightest provocation. The signal was given to split into 2 teams and break down the door to the hotel. Ray was surprised by what was happening and shouted, demanding that they stop. The boys rushed forward. Ray looked at them and filled his mouth with magic, preparing for a powerful scream. He screamed with all his might. The sound surprised the guys. They covered their ears and froze in front of him. One of the gang shouted to stop them, citing the hunter's orders. The other guys were surprised, not understanding why the enemy was giving orders. After all, Ray had taken out their boss, Kedrick. The crowd discussed how their boss was now the hunter, arguing over whether he should be considered the leader. Orders were given to block the door and defend it with their lives. Philip watched everything from the window, standing next to the crowd of people, amazed by the unexpected union. He couldn't believe that Kedrick's gang was now helping, finding it incredible. Men with a huge pipe appeared in the crowd, shouting and rushing forward, attacking the doors, using it as a battering ram. Philip and the people around were in shock. The guys were smiling, preparing for the attack. One of the attackers suddenly froze when he saw Ray holding the pipe alone. The crowd was surprised. He had just been behind them. No one understood when he had managed to approach. The boys tried to push the pipe, hoping to break through by force, but Ray used magic. The screams and surprise of the attackers echoed over the battlefield. They could not cope with Ray's sudden strength. Ray grabbed the pipe, swung it, and slammed it onto the floor, breaking it. Philip looked out the window and smiled. He couldn't believe his eyes how this was even possible. People in the crowd fell to the ground in fear as they watched Ray's display of power. The boys shouted that they could not win, and the whole crowd rushed back, retreating. Ray stood before them, feeling like he had reached his limit. Ray was surprised. The crowd bowed and began chanting about his strength and respect. People declared Ray their boss, celebrating the victory and expressing delight. Ray didn't understand the emotions that swept over the people, sensing their unusual mood. Philip made his way through the crowd, trying to attract attention and say something. Philip approached Ray, opening the doors behind him, creating a path towards him. Ray suddenly fell to the ground, exhausted, surprised at his own fatigue. He thought that the situation was not so bad, despite the weakness. Philip screamed, falling to his knees in front of Ray, expressing emotion and fatigue. A stretcher began to be carried out of the building, preparing to evacuate the victim. Ray felt like he was in a black and white dream. Everything around him was devoid of color. He looked around in wonder. In front of him, there was a mountain of some unknown material, which he approached and began to climb. He reached the top, the sun shining bright white in the monochrome world. A strange feeling of certainty appeared inside Ray, that this light had been white all along, and he reached out his hand towards the light. Cracks appeared from his hand, from which a rainbow glow burst forth, engulfing everything. All the colors of the rainbow intertwined around Ray, creating an incredible spectacle. Ray was amazed. His eyes lit up with a rainbow glow. He couldn't believe what he saw. Suddenly he opened his eyes and woke up in the hotel infirmary. Ray was looking around. He realized that it was a dream, asking himself questions about what he saw and the strange sensations. Two guys burst into the room, smiling, offering Ray food and asking how he was feeling. Ray was surprised and refused the food, asking what day it was and the exact time. The guys reported July 11th, 1823. Ray realized he had slept all day. Ray got out of bed and headed to the common room, ready for action and reflection. He decided to take a short walk. People in the room were discussing Capson and Nipper's work on 6th Street and the upcoming opening hours. Ray thought about Philip and his intelligence service sending men to Kedrick Street. It seemed that while he was sleeping, Philip had distributed the work among the members of Kedrick's gang. Ray watched the room. The boys offered to help. They were strong and ready to obey the boys' orders. The guys asked them to help carry boxes of supplies to the warehouse. The boys eagerly took the boxes, happy to have the opportunity to be useful. Ray noticed the glow on Kedrick's men and was surprised, realizing that it was their fault. Ray walked down the steps. People in the crowd were surprised to learn that Hunter had woken up. People asked about his well-being and admired his victory. They proclaimed Ray their leader and offered chocolate and help. The crowd was interested in Ray's shoe and underwear size and where he learned to fight. Ray wondered whether he should yell at them and chase them away or just ignore them. Suddenly a familiar voice was heard, and Ray looked around in surprise. Kedrick screamed as he approached with a knife, trying to grab Ray from behind. The crowd tried to stop Kedrick, but Ray calmed everyone down, saying that everything was fine and that they should move away. Kedrick was furious and ran at Ray, brandishing a scalpel. Kedrick's scalpel was just a millimeter from Ray's eye. The crowd was terrified. Kedrick was swinging at Ray. He was threatening to kill him, but Kedrick stopped repeating the threats. Ray took his hands and pulled him towards himself. Kedrick was surprised by his actions. Ray asked why he stopped. Didn't Kedrick try to cut his throat? Ray noticed that there was no red mana in Kedrick's vessel, and realized that Kedrick would never be able to kill him. Then Kedrick held the scalpel to his throat, trying to kill himself. The crowd was shocked. Ray used magic to take the scalpel from Kedrick. The scalpel fell to the ground. The crowd was shocked. Ray held Kedrick's hand, watching him closely. Kedrick was in shock. Ray led him along, arguing for the need to talk. Philip apologized for leaving sharp objects in the first aid station. Ray assured everyone that everything was fine and no one was hurt. Kedrick sat on the couch in silence. Philip asked him about what had happened, trying to understand why Kedrick was ready to die. Kedrick explained that he took his duel seriously and believed that after losing, everyone would despise him and laugh at him. He was irritated when Philip tried to calm him down by arguing that losing didn't make him weak. A new feeling appeared inside Kedrick. His mana was being depleted at an abnormally high rate. Ray recalled Veronica explaining that the ring was like a charge stone that stored unused mana, though it had its limits and the risk of addiction. Kedrick did not understand why he was saved, believing that he should have remained in the fire. Philip explained that he did it because Kedrick was his friend. Cedric was shocked, remembering that he had tried to kill Philip and was going to avenge his defeat. But Philip remained true to his friendship. Cedric protested, considering these words unfair, but Philip insisted that Cedric had his own reasons for such actions. Ray, watching Kedrick, noticed that there was no red mana in his vessel and realized that he was only pretending to be evil. Philip reminded Kedrick that they had spent half their lives together, trying to awaken in him a sense of responsibility and friendship. Kedrick resisted, screaming and asking him to stop, but Philip held his hand, begging him to explain his actions. Doubts arose within Kedrick. He realized that he had lived without paying attention to Philip, despite his actions against him. He confessed his guilt, hugging Philip and expressing regret for everything he had done. Philip tried to calm Kedrick down while Ray watched, assessing the situation. Kedrick spoke about his hatred of his own weakness, his envy of those who were stronger, and how he ended up working in a hotel. There were gangs operating there that eventually brought him to his knees and robbed him of his money. His words expressed a mixture of remorse, anger at himself, and awareness of past mistakes. Kedrick explained that he decided to become stronger on his own, training daily and imagining how he would fight off the bandits. He said that despite his efforts, he was mistaken in his expectations. He was beaten and did not return to the hotel, unable to bear the humiliation of his pride. This is what gave rise to hatred and justification of his own actions. Kedrick realized that he tried to be different from others and not put up with the strong until one day he met someone who changed his path. Kedrick said that a man in a cloak approached him, noticed his anger, and compared it to a powder keg ready to explode. The man asked what was causing him to be so angry, and Kedrick admitted that he hated himself to the point of madness. The man smiled and handed him the ring, explaining that it would ease the illness that prevented him from using his full-body strength. After Kedrick put on the ring, his strength increased to an incredible level. He was able to lift weights with one hand. The man warned that without the ring, the disease would return, and gave instructions to gather a group of 66 strong and healthy people, promising an even greater reward if Kedrick succeeds. Kedrick admitted that he agreed without hesitation. He had long dreamed of becoming a gang leader, but Ray stopped him immediately, saying that Kedrick's power did not come from curing the disease. The reason was something else, the magic of the ring. Hearing this, Kedrick did not believe it and began to scream, demanding the ring be returned, but suddenly froze when Ray explained the existence of mana. To prove it, he created fire in his palm and showed that mana could create flames and enhance strength. Kedrick realized that he had been deceived all this time. The ring only filled him with power from the outside. The thought that he was once again the same weakling as before hit him. But Ray said there was no need to go back to the past. If Kedrick listens to him and follows his instructions, he can become truly strong. These words shocked Kedrick. Kedrick, standing at the door, bowed several times to Ray and Philip, sincerely thanking them for everything. When he left, Philip asked Ray doubtfully if he was really going to appoint Kedrick as his deputy and trust him with running the group. Ray confirmed, explaining that he would have to leave one day anyway, and someone would have to take over. Later, Kedrick eagerly asked Ray to teach him the technique he used during the duel. Ray noted that Kedrick has a strong body and good physical attributes, and if he masters the precise technique, he will be able to make up for the difference in strength and size of his opponents. Philip, watching them, thanked Ray for looking after his friend, and noted that Kedrick's return to the hotel with the reward was an important step for him. He added that winning by force is not the worst method in itself, but it does not allow the opponent to preserve his pride, which may make him thirsty for a counterattack. Ray, slightly surprised, thought that he himself had never encountered a situation where the defeated returned for revenge. He merely noted that perhaps Philip had simply not intimidated them enough. Ray calmly noted that he still believed brute force was the best method. A frightened opponent would not dare even think about revenge. Philip objected. Strength alone is not enough to earn the loyalty of children. He emphasized that a worthy reward works much better, citing the example of Ray's offer to teach Kedrick to fight. Ray thought about it, admitting that he couldn't build everything on this method alone, but he shouldn't ignore it either. He noted that Philip was really good at managing people. Addressing the crowd, Ray announced that they would be staying at the hotel for now until they found a new shelter, and he warned, if anyone caused trouble to the children, he would personally take charge of the punishment. Then he appointed Kedrick as vice leader, ordering them to treat his orders the same as their own. People in the crowd looked at each other and thought that yesterday's conflict had really been resolved. Many people discussed that Kedrick used to have his own gang. Perhaps he could help them with training. Ray thought about Philip's words about the reward being the key to true loyalty and added another solution: to return to the children all the money they had bet. He said he had made enough money from the other gangs. More and more voices were saying that they would be on Hunter's side no matter what. The crowd buzzed with surprise. People did not believe that he was really giving the money back, and whispered that the hunter looked more like an angel. Philip, taking advantage of the moment, reminded Ray that they still had business with Zephyr and Rodson. The gang leaders were lying tied up in the cell. Ray wasted no time getting straight to the point by mentioning Veronica's bookstore. He removed the bandage from Zephyr's face and warned him that he didn't seem to understand the situation he was in. Zephyr asked him in a trembling voice what he wanted: money or something else. But before he could finish speaking, he received a sharp blow to the face from Ray. Ray coldly noted that that was not what he was asking and turned his attention to Rodson. He tore off the blindfold, and the man, wincing in the light, admitted that he was talking about 8th Street. Rodson explained that he had only been hired to spy. When Ray asked who his employer was, he named the owner of Fred's main store on 3rd Street. Hearing this, Ray grabbed him by the hair and slammed his face into the concrete with all his might. Blood flowed from his cut forehead, and Rodson screamed in pain. But Ray didn't stop and struck a few more blows. The crowd watched in silence. Philip, looking at what was happening, thought that this is exactly how the real Ray would behave: ruthless and decisive. But he also realized something else. By punishing these ringleaders publicly, Ray was not only getting information, but it also helps the children from the hotel to vent their accumulated resentment and anger at those who kept them in fear. The crowd shouted, encouraging Ray. There were cries that the bandits had gotten too little for everything they had done to the children, and that the hunter was not to be trifled with. Philip noted that this was not just a brutal massacre. It would be a good example for Kedrick's gang. He saw that Ray was acting coldly and calculatingly, and this was further strengthening his power. Ray, addressing the captured leaders, announced a special task to them. No matter what they did, their main goal now was to destroy the main store. He emphasized that any betrayal or the slightest harm to his people will not go unanswered. Night fell on the city. Zephyr and Roston, beaten and humiliated, tried to return home unnoticed with the rest of their people. They were released, but not forgiven. At this time, the mood in the hotel was completely different. Long tables were laden with food, laughter, and joyful cries could be heard. Someone noticed that the hunter was nowhere to be seen. The girl said that she wanted to bring him food, but he had disappeared somewhere. People were surprised, looked at each other, but no one knew where he had gone. Ray sat alone on the outdoor sofa in silence at this time, his thoughts returning to Philip's words. A true friend is not just an acquaintance, but someone who helps without expecting any benefit and accepts help in return. Ray reflected that he had always considered friendship to be only long-term acquaintances, but now he realized that the essence was completely different. He acknowledged that the children he took responsibility for were perhaps the only ones who really meant anything to him. I remembered Niels and thought of him with unusual warmth as a friend. But then I began to doubt, can people with a 20-year age difference be friends? Ray felt he would hardly be able to call anyone his friend again. His nature was different, too cold, detached, without many of the usual human emotions. And yet, in his heart, Niles and the kids from the subway remained, the only ones who accepted him as he was, without conditions or expectations. He doubted that he would ever meet another person who could truly understand him. Felipe appeared on the threshold of the terrace, holding a mug in his hands. He noticed Ray and said with a slight smile that the silence was much better than the noise and bustle of the feast. He had a cup of cocoa in his hand. He handed it to Ray, noting that the hunter liked sweets. Ray frowned to himself. He didn't eat chocolate and candy for pleasure, but to replenish his strength after the battle. But it seemed that Philip took this as an attachment to sweets. Philip, without waiting for permission, nevertheless asked if he could sit down next to him, and sat down next to him. Ray took the cup, took a cautious sip, and was slightly surprised. The taste was soft, enveloping, not like the dry sweets he was used to. Philip watched him, as if checking his reaction, and smiled quietly. Ray caught himself thinking strangely. The drink was warm, and this warmth, even if only briefly, seemed to fill the emptiness inside. The morning began with a farewell. At the gates of Philip's base, he and Ray exchanged short words. Philip was going north, where they said there were abandoned factories. Ray nodded, then disappeared into the street. People were panicking and pulling each other into alleys, shouting at them to hide quickly. Ray headed towards Veronica's library. The door swung open and the girl rushed towards him, barely noticing him. She greeted him with joy, but immediately frowned, noticing the bandage on his face and his tired appearance. Alarm crept into her voice. She realized that something serious had happened to him. He tried to brush it off, assuring her that everything was fine. But Veronica didn't believe it. Her eyes filled with tears, and she stubbornly reached out to him to heal. Ray gently stopped her, reminding her that her heavenly mana was too dangerous to use often. She hesitated and admitted that she had acted without thinking, simply because he looked injured. Ray thought about it. He looked at her and suddenly realized that he was feeling something new. Her concern seemed bright, like soft sunlight. Perhaps it was because he was learning to feel. And now he saw what had previously eluded him. As he was climbing the steps, he suddenly asked a strange question. Did she consider him a friend? The girl was confused. She tried to figure it out on her own. On the one hand, he saved her twice, became her protector, and the person with whom she shared the secret of mana. On the other hand, they had known each other for so short a time that calling him a friend seemed hasty. She thought for a moment, then smiled and finally confirmed. Yes, friend. Ray nodded briefly, as if that was enough for him, and headed further towards his grandfather. Veronica stood there, slightly puzzled. Her own feelings had been ignored. Veronica caught up with Ray on the stairs and called out to him. She was out of breath, but asked him directly if he considered her a friend. Ray looked into her eyes and calmly replied, "No." The girl suddenly flared up, cursed, and, turning away, said that it would be better for him to go ahead, and that she needed to feed the children. "She'll be up later." Ray wondered why she was so angry, but he didn't ask himself and opened the door. Inside, he was met by an old man. He rose from his bed with difficulty and, smiling, noted that, contrary to the saying about old people who sleep little, he, on the contrary, sleeps longer and longer. Soon, probably, he will be able to sleep the whole day. Ray asked directly about the illness he had heard about from Veronica. The old man did not deny it and admitted that he had little time left. 6 months, no more. He then said that this was why he was going to start teaching Ray magic. Ray agreed, but first handed him a ring with a red stone and asked him to explain what this thing was. The old man carefully examined the ring and explained, "This is a type of mana accumulator, an improved ring with reinforcement elements. Under certain conditions, it increases physical strength and speeds up reactions, and it also contains an extraction spell." Ray frowned when he heard the old man's explanation. Extraction magic seemed impossible to him, but his grandfather confidently confirmed that it did exist. Usually mana batteries run out and become useless, but this ring is different. It is enchanted to recharge itself by draining the wearer's stamina and converting it into mana. Ray wondered if it was possible to do this. The old man explained that human life force is also a form of mana, so such a formula is possible, although extremely dangerous. The main thing, he noted, is that such spells are not something any craftsman can do. They are created only by masters of the highest level. The old man looked at Ray seriously and asked where he got such a dangerous thing. Ray answered honestly. The ring had come to him from the previous leader of the children's gang, and he had received it from a man who called himself a representative of Mirkred. At the mention of this name, the old man's face changed dramatically. He sighed heavily and said that everyone knew Mirkred. This is the most powerful and secretive underground organization. They trade in anything: weapons, drugs, even people. Unlike other syndicates, their numbers are not as large, but their strength and secrecy make them much more dangerous. Grandpa continued to explain to Ray why the Mirkred were so dangerous. All members of this group possessed magic, and this gave them enormous power. Ray was surprised and asked if there were that many of them. Grandfather replied that there weren't many of them, but each one was extremely dangerous. Mirkred's symbol was a red gemstone. Their mana batteries showed that mages were not afraid of becoming addicted to magic, making them even more unpredictable and deadly. He realized that he had heard something about them before, and his grandfather noted that he had learned about it during his youth, when he was looking for a rainbow. Grandfather added that it is the red stone that contains part of the rainbow, the source of strength and magic that makes the owners of Mirkred so powerful. Ray was surprised to realize how deep and dangerous the magical web connected to this stone was, and how much he had yet to understand. Grandpa continued to tell that when he was looking for the rainbow, he got a red stone from one of the Mirkred members. The stone was much better quality than mana batteries. Grandpa wondered how they could provide all the gang members with such stones, and came up with the rainbow theory. The rainbow was originally a stone that contained infinite light and mana. Grandfather explained that long ago the sky was always blue, the earth strong and fertile. At the heart of the first city built by humans was a rainbow stone filled with life energy. The light emitted by the rainbow made the soil fertile and healed the sick. But many wanted to appropriate the rainbow, and war broke out between factions. After a long war, the rainbow split into 7 fragments, which scattered all over the world. Ray interrupted his grandfather, asking if this meant that Mirkred had one of the rainbow fragments. Grandpa confirmed that it was true that the red stones that the gang members were in possession of were rainbow shards. He added that he had found people who shared his assumption, but further investigation was difficult because Mirkred was very dangerous. Ray thought about the man in the basement, who he believed was definitely a member of the Mirkred gang. Although it remained unknown whether he was the leader, he realized that the key to the rainbow could be hidden here, and realized the danger of the upcoming investigation. Grandpa noted that there was no point in trying to stop Ray, and Ray confirmed that he respected his opinion. Grandfather returned the ring to Ray and told him everything he knew about Mirkred. Ray asked if the charms contained in the ring could be removed. Veronica entered the room and announced that she was inside. Grandfather noted that they had a new student today, and it was time to start with the basics. He asked Veronica if she minded, and the girl agreed. Grandfather explained that any magic begins with the formation of a circle, and mana can be used from the air or from mana batteries. He warned that mana is addictive, so circles play an important role, and the heavenly mana is purified as it enters the circle. The element that fills the circle depends on the owner of the mana, and each person has personal restrictions on its use. Ray thought that he had seen magic circles with different colors of mana before, and that forming a circle was generally not difficult. Grandpa offered to explain the process to Veronica. She explained that you need to concentrate mana in your hand, use what you do best, then direct it to the heart, surrounding it with energy, and do not stop, picking up speed. The girl noted that she had not yet been able to form a circle, since she had not held the mana until the end, but she smiled, realizing that she needed to try again. Grandfather told Veronica not to be too hard on herself, and noted that she was doing better every day. The girl thanked him, but deep down she wanted to show that she was capable of creating a fully completed magic circle, understanding how difficult it was. Grandpa asked Ray if he would try, and he agreed. Ray closed his eyes and concentrated, imagining the magic flowing. He started by directing his mana towards something familiar that he had good control over, choosing the color red. A circle began to form around his heart, and he concentrated with all his might. Veronica's mouth dropped open in amazement, and her grandfather looked at Ray with bewilderment. Ray felt like his body was about to explode, but he held on, remembering his dead friends to achieve his goal. At first, the mana evaporated, and there was nothing around the heart. But the flow of energy increased, and a circle began to form. Ray was amazed, and a smile appeared on his face. Grandpa and Veronica focused their attention on Ray. He was emitting a strong vibration that Grandpa immediately felt. Veronica took his hands and noted with a smile on her face that Ray had created a circle. She called him a genius, amazed that he had managed on the first try what had taken her 3 months. Grandfather was amazed at Ray's ability. His circle contained elements of strengthening, weakening, regeneration, as well as almost all types of mana. Red of rage, pale pink of sadness, white of anxiety, and many others. Ray was amazed that such a thing was possible, and his grandfather explained that the mana inside the circle could be seen or felt as energy. He added that if you don't want others to see the circle, you just need to stop the flow of mana and the circle will disintegrate. In everyday life, this is important so as not to reveal yourself as a magician. At the same time, the visibility of the circle depends on the distance. Grandpa noted that Ray had just formed the first circle and didn't look tired. He suggested testing it right away by asking Ray to cast a spell and try to repeat it. Grandfather clasped his hands and a cube appeared inside them. He asked Ray if he could do it again. Veronica was amazed by the complexity of the spell. It used more than 7 different elements, requiring precise calculations and the correct ratio. She wondered how Ray would manage without any hints. But Ray was already holding a cube just like his grandfather's. The girl froze in surprise, and the grandfather was amazed by Ray's skill. Grandfather praised his work and suggested trying again. The cubes changed shape. From a house, they turned into a rose, or a statue of a girl. Grandfather thought that forming the magic circle had unlocked Ray's potential, but the results were beyond his expectations. Veronica enthusiastically noted that Ray was a true genius. Grandpa was sleeping in bed, and Veronica and Ray were standing outside the door. The girl noticed his amazing skill and asked how he managed to do it. Ray explained that he couldn't see mana, he just tried it, and it worked. He refused to go into detail, but Veronica still found it incredible, and noted that he was probably the most capable mage she had ever met. Ray asked her an unexpected question about envy. Veronica was surprised at first, but admitted that she admired him, but was not envious. She called him her friend, which surprised Ray. He wondered if friends could envy each other. Veronica explained that not always, but most of the time no, and in her mind Ray should have considered her a friend too. Ray remembered Pei's words about sharing food and taking care of brothers, and tried to understand the meaning of friendship and care. Veronica noted that although he spoke calmly, There was a sense of sadness in him that added depth to his image. Veronica left calling Ray weird, and he thought she was right. He asked the girl to teach him how to read and write. She was surprised at first, but remembered that she had helped the kids with their studies before and thought that she could handle it. Ray thanked her and promised to try his best. And Veronica thought that since he was her savior, she should try her best even if she was not a teacher. Then she said that there was something that needed to be done first. Ray realized that high knowledge does not come for free and guessed that she wanted to deal with the gang from the air. Veronica said he needed to wash up on the second floor, and she would get him some fresh clothes. Ray was puzzled, but followed her instructions. Veronica turned around when she heard Ray's voice and asked if he had washed himself yet. Ray walked towards her in his robe and asked where to put the towel. The girl was surprised and thought to herself that he was cute. She turned away, trying to hide her emotions, and then told Ray to get dressed quickly. Then she asked him why he wanted to learn to read. Ray explained that this was so that he could continue his journey to the Elton River and learn more. He admitted that Niles had already tried to teach him, but he had not listened well. Veronica said that the store was closed for now, and he could come any time so that she could train him. Ray mentioned opening the store, and Veronica was surprised that it was already open, noting that the people who threw stones had not appeared for a long time. She asked if he had killed them, but Ray assured her that he would not have killed for breaking windows. The girl was a little scared, but agreed to open the store after school. On the table lay Veronica's books and notes, from which she herself learned to read. Ray asked how long she had been studying and learned that it was a month. He took the books and notes and promised to try his best, to which Veronica replied that she was also ready to help. Ray sat at the table and Veronica stood at the board, explaining the order of subjects. She repeated the difficult part, and Ray quickly understood what he needed to do, marking it in his notebook. Veronica was surprised that he made only one mistake, and was glad that he was getting through the textbook so quickly. They agreed to take a break for today, as Veronica needed to prepare new materials. She asked Ray to be there while she tried to create a magic circle. Ray doubted that he could help in any way, but agreed to simply observe and suggest if an idea came to him. Veronica smiled, noting that this was a kind of payment for the lesson. Veronica was sorting through books, and Ray was looking around, walking around the room. She was thinking that the store hadn't been open for a long time, and there was a lot of work ahead. Ray asked permission to borrow books to read, and Veronica agreed, asking her to take care of them. She asked if he could do it without her help, to which Ray replied that he would try. She told him to first take the dictionary, which surprised Ray. Veronica explained that the dictionary contains the meanings of almost all words, and if you come across unfamiliar ones, it will come in handy. When Ray asked if it contained the word rainbow, she admitted that she hadn't checked, because it was associated with magic. Ray found the right book on the shelf using magic, lifting several books at once, which was previously impossible. He noted that with the use of the circle's mana, it was easy. Ray thought about the concentration of mana in the circle. Red, pale pink and white, with pale pink and white being particularly resistant. He had rarely used them before, but now by experimenting with them, he could discover new spells. Ray decided not to force the issue. Even though the boy didn't yet understand, the emotion associated with the pale pink mana was sadness. He focused on the red and white mana, whose built-in unconscious protection allowed him to never experience sadness again. He developed a deep aversion to everything connected with this feeling. Ray was sitting on the floor reading a book and noted that the dictionary, as Veronica had said, did not have the word rainbow, which surprised him. He told Veronica that he would be going out for a short while, explaining that he would finish reading the books when he returned, and asked her to leave them. Once outside, Ray finally realized that the man was the true target. Ray found the definition of the word sacrifice in the book. It is an offering of something, an object, an animal, or a person who has surrendered. He suggested that the man was probably trying to use street children as victims for some purpose. Considering the concentration of magic put into the ring, this is most likely due to the strengthening of the red stone. He also took into account that there were currently about 66 people in the gang, and concluded that this person was eagerly awaiting a report from Kedrick. After some time, Ray found himself in a restaurant opposite the stranger's home. On his table there were already plates with various delicacies: mussels, oysters, cakes, salads, different types of meat, ribs, ice cream, and a cocktail. He noted that he had only ordered a drink, but the waiter explained that many people had already paid for a full meal for him, and that he could eat 10 of those dinners at once. Ray asked where the man was, and the waiter said that he had come out 3 hours later than usual. Something like this had never happened before. The waiter also added that he had seen a stranger pass by, smiling and muttering something like, "It's almost time." This information made Ray think. The sun was shining brightly on the city, and Ray knew that the key was kept here. He thought about the secret of Merkred, and that in front of the steps of a stranger's home, one must not act thoughtlessly, because it is unknown when he will return. Suddenly, on the street, Ray noticed a group of guys who stopped near the stairs and started discussing something. One of them was recalling a recent fight, and the other was suddenly listening to the story. Suddenly, they heard someone's voice from behind. It was Ray standing behind them. The boys were shocked and amazed to find out that it was a hunter in front of them. They realized that he was out of sorts, almost like an undead, and one of them, smiling, asked if everything was okay. Ray remembered Philip's words about the carrot and stick, and promised that if they did the job right, they would receive a reward. He pointed to a waiter with an abundance of food, and the boys, amazed and drooling, agreed to do their best. Ray walked down the steps to the door where he saw a lock glowing red. It wasn't there before. He used magic to open it and was surprised by the red glow. Ray thought about the lock. He got the feeling that it was some kind of spell protection. He considered his options: break the lock and risk being discovered, or remove the door hinges. A voice came from behind. "Mr. Hunter, he's here! That man!" the boy shouted. Ray turned around and wondered for a moment if the stranger would recognize him. The basement was dark, and he changed his voice, which gave him a chance to remain unnoticed. Ray took off his coat and pressed himself against the wall, watching the stranger pass by. The stranger looked at him, but said nothing. Ray watched him silently, and as the man walked away, he realized that the stranger did not recognize him. At that moment, Ray realized something important. The next day, the street was deserted. 2 people stood near the bunker, Ray and Kedrick. Kedrick asked if everything would be okay. Ray told him not to worry and just follow his instructions. Kedrick thought about it and was suddenly surprised. A man was approaching them. The teacher bowed to Kedrick and said that it had been a long time since they had seen each other. The stranger interrupted the greetings and demanded that Kedrick show his face. Kedrick complied and reported the number of participants expected. The man stopped him and pointed at Ray, asking who it was. Kedrick explained that he was new and had just been appointed leader of the gang. The man told Ray to look up and asked his name. Ray was silent, then introduced himself. His new name was Niles. The stranger smiled and said that everything was clear and Ray should work hard. Ray thought that the man did not even remember the meeting yesterday. The stranger asked how many people there were now, to which Kedrick replied that there were 63, only 3 left. Kedrick added that only the strongest were being recruited. Walter said that everything was fine and that as soon as everyone was recruited, he would accept them into the organization. Kedrick happily noted that he couldn't believe that they would become members of the organization. The man explained that a special unit was just being prepared, and Kedrick considered this the greatest success. Inside, he was doubtful, thinking that the man in shabby clothes could be the leader. Ray asked about the main base and the side branches. The man said that Merkred has no side branches, they only spread their laws, and the main base is in the 43rd sector, where all operations are planned. Ray noticed that the man's mana was trembling and doubted his words. He asked about the boss, and the stranger called him incredible. So great that he didn't even dare look at him. Ray watched as Kedrick interacted with the stranger, noticing that his eyes were filled with both admiration and hidden fear. Kedrick said he was moving in 2 days, and the stranger said he would come in 3 to carefully examine those who were going to be accepted. Ray watched the man's actions. He left the mana deliberately in small quantities, turning the abandoned factory into a huge canvas. The man drew a pictogram on the floor. Then he took out red stones, which began to fly in the air, forming a circle emitting red energy. Kedrick was surprised and asked if it was safe now. Everything was fine, Ray reassured him. The stones were spread out across the pictogram pattern on the floor, and the stranger stood in the middle. He explained to Kedrick that this was the same stone that was in the ring he had received earlier. The stone suppresses diseases and increases energy. The stranger warned Kedrick not to touch the stone and to protect the ring as if it were his own life. Kedrick confirmed that he understood. The stranger said that he would return in 3 days, after which the door closed behind him. Kedrick fell to the floor from the strain. The stranger was finally gone. He wondered what the man was planning now. Ray said he would find out. He told Kedrick to go back to the hotel alone, as he still had some work to do. Ray stood on the steps, looking at the pictogram carefully. He thought that there was definitely magic involved. He took out a notebook and began to sketch the picture. There was magic involved here. He didn't care, because the one who should know already knew. The next day, Ray sat in the library, looking at the pictogram he had drawn in his notebook. Grandpa noticed the drawing and was surprised, asking if it was related to the man from Merkrid. Ray said nothing, noting that he felt awkward about Grandpa's attention. Grandfather explained that in front of him was a magic circle, a formula that significantly increases the power and range of magic. The creation of such circles is extremely difficult and accessible to few. He noted that Ray was able to replicate a high-level magic circle without basic knowledge of circles. Grandfather compared the process of reading and copying magic to untangling a thin, tangled thread with his fingers, while separating each thread precisely. Even a magician with exceptional abilities could not do this without knowledge of the circles. Grandfather explained that the function of this particular magic circle is extraction. Grandfather explained that the magic of the pictogram was similar to that contained in the ring that Ray showed. He suggested that Ray was able to see mana, and that the magic itself was much more powerful than usual. He explained that when the magic circle was activated, all living beings within the area of effect would be destroyed, and their life force would be converted into mana. Ray realized that the man was going to use Kedrick and his gang as victims for a magic circle involving 66 children. Grandfather noted that humans could not use mana of such concentration due to the toxicity contained in the life energy. Thoughtless use of such mana can poison the user, and it cannot be converted back into a magic circle. It is usually only used with fuel creatures or to enhance magical tools. Mana batteries can also boost, but they have limits. The ring works differently and has a unique power. Ray thought about what he had heard, but suddenly his grandfather called out to him, trying to understand his intentions. Ray didn't say a word, but silently looked up and met his grandfather's eyes, showing the seriousness of his thoughts and inner determination. 3 days later, at the appointed hour, Ray stood outside the bunker, waiting for Walter to arrive. He approached, surprised by Kedrick's absence and surprised that Ray was alone. Ray explained that the boss was busy organizing people inside, and he only came out to say hello. Walter didn't hide his mockery, but agreed to go inside. When they approached the doors, he noticed the emptiness inside the bunker. Walter was amazed and wondered why there was no one. Before he could look back, he sensed a threat. Ray swung his dagger. Walter managed to put his scythe under the blow, parrying it. Ray used fire magic, delivering a powerful energy blast that the stranger dodged. Suddenly, the door slammed shut, plunging the stranger into total darkness. Ray announced that he had come to kill him on orders from his boss. The stranger laughed, calling him an executioner, not hiding his irony and mockery. The stranger laughed, realizing that Ray was aware of the use of the magic circle. He noted that the magic would activate at exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and the clock showed 2 hours and 14 minutes. Ray realized that this was even better than sacrificing worthless brats, because in this case, he would become more useful. The stranger began to run, and Ray, remaining calm, prepared a dagger to reflect the blows and activated fire magic, preparing for a fight. Philip looked through binoculars at the building, trying to make out something, but nothing was visible. He noted that all doors and windows leading outside were locked, as Ray had requested. Kedrick was scared, thinking about the hunter, and Philip asked him to be quiet. Veronica, the mage Ray had brought, was sitting nearby. Kedrick wondered if they were close. The boys asked her name, she answered, and Philip introduced himself along with Kedrick. They discussed whether Veronica was worried about Ray, and she said she was not. At this time, a fierce struggle was going on between Ray and the stranger, and Veronica noted that Ray was the most talented magician she had ever met, and that he was good not only at magic, so she was not worried. Philip watched Veronica carefully. Her hands were shaking, although she tried to remain calm. He understood that she was worried, but she believed in Ray. Philip thought that he should just trust him. At this time, the fight continued. Ray's dagger sparkled, and the stranger, blazing with fire, went on the attack. The blow caused the dagger to break, and the stranger shouted, demanding that Ray surrender. Ray used magic, and the dagger was restored, ready to repel the attack. The stranger's scythe flew back, and he looked at it in surprise, noticing the element of stability and Ray's ability to control multiple elements. Ray swung and struck, his eyes widening with the force of it. Walter grabbed his throat, and Ray was left holding the stump of the dagger. The magical transformation astounded him. He knew that his attacks were of little use against a second circle mage. Walter tried to buy time before the magic circle was activated by opening the cloak with the pictogram on the chest. But Ray wasn't going to give in. A huge magical snake burst out of Walter's chest and aimed at Ray. Ray took the drawing of the pictogram that Veronica showed him and used it in battle. The pictogram glowed blue in the air. Energy flowed towards the magical snake, directing power towards it. Ray learned to reproduce such a magic circle on his own, but when concentrating the magic, blood began to flow from his nose. Everything around was illuminated with blue light. The stranger realized that this was not a first circle mage in front of him and became confused. Ray approached him slowly, confidently, and calmly. His blue wave of energy rushed straight towards the enemy, and he, realizing the danger, exclaimed, but it was too late. Ray remained calm, focused on the goal. The magic dissipated, leaving only Ray and Walter, who was sitting on the floor with his head down in the warehouse. The surroundings were pitch black. Ray watched him and looked at his watch. Walter stood up, realizing that time was running out, and was about to return to his boss. Ray stopped him at the door, threatening to destroy the ring. Walter tried to explain that it was useless. Ray's goal was to buy time, and the red bloodstones of the executors cannot be destroyed. Ray realized that they could be broken if exposed to the elements correctly, and that the weak underside of the stones made them vulnerable. As the stranger turned to kill him before leaving, Ray threw the ring far away from him. The stone rolled across the floor. The stranger tried to grab it but didn't have time. Ray watched everything from afar, and the stranger screamed and tried to attack, but it was too late. Ray went out the door and closed it. The pictogram on the floor suddenly glowed red, and the stranger found himself right in the center of the magic circle. He was surprised because there was still time left before activation. Ray understood that the acceleration of the circle's work was possible for a maximum of 5 minutes. The magic circle was broken, and the stranger found himself trapped in a magical wave, screaming about the boss. Ray opened the doors inward. On the floor, only the stranger's clothes and the ring, still emitting a red glow, remained. Ray picked up the ring, holding it in his hands. Veronica, Philip, and Kedrick sat on the floor, watching what was happening. It was already late, and Kedrick wanted to say something, but Philip shut his mouth, suggesting that he just wait. Veronica stood up thoughtfully. feeling an unusual tension. Philip and Kedrick hurried after her, following ahead as Ray appeared ahead, surrounded by a magical aura. Veronica realized that his mana was poisoned and he was in danger. They watched him closely, preparing to act. Kedrick tried to attack Ray using a pipe and an iron sheet, but immediately fell in front of him. Ray's power stopped him. Philip tried to get Ray out of his threat state by shouting his name, but Ray directed magical energy at them. Veronica turned on the protective field. She realized that there were two ways to stop Ray. Either make him exhaust all his magical energy, or extinguish it. Philip called the fire truck. The field needed to be held for 5 minutes. Veronica held the defense. A powerful magical energy emanated from Ray and attacked everyone around him. Veronica listened to her inner voice. She understood that she herself was not able to completely stop Ray's magical aura. All she could do was create a protective field to minimize the destruction and keep those around her safe. Her thoughts were focused on one goal: keeping Ray safe, despite the danger of the situation. Immediately after the battle with Walter, Ray was left alone with the ring in his hands. Enormous red energy began to emanate from it, and the mana power within it increased significantly. It was incomparable to the level of a normal magic circle. Suddenly, Ray's eyes lit up with a bright red light. A voice filled with despair and fear sounded in his mind, like a memory of Walter, who had recently been defeated. The man fell to the ground, engulfed in red flames, and his thoughts repeated one thing: to become stronger, to destroy everyone he saw, to absorb the bodies and burn everything to the ground. His words were filled with nothing but killing orders, and they seemed to permeate Ray's aura. Ray directed the force forward and it rushed towards Veronica. Philip and Kedrick were shocked by the scale of what was happening, and Veronica did her best to create a protective field, holding back the threat. There was still hope inside her to save Ray. The light was like a white sun to Ray, blindingly beautiful, and for a moment he froze, seeing Veronica in front of him. Her tears and anxiety caught his gaze. Within him, strength and consciousness struggled to maintain control over the destructive power that had burst forth from the ring. 3 days later, at Philippa's hotel, Ray was helping Veronica in the infirmary. He handed her water, and she smiled gratefully. Ray noticed that Veronica had been sick for 2 days after using the heavenly mana. He understood that her condition was connected to his actions, and caring for her became natural for him. Veronica asked Ray to bring the second volume of the book, Light and Rose, and 2 more pillows, carefully fluffed, and also to take away the empty mug. Ray was silent, thinking about his principle of always returning what he received. She asked if the cause of his illness was mana intoxication. Ray confirmed this, considering the situation unresolved for now. Veronica pointed out his reckless use of concentrated mana, and Ray agreed that this was the main problem. The girl noticed that in Ray's palm there was a ring, a mana battery that he took from that man, emitting negative energy. She remembered her grandfather's words about how mana could be extracted from highly toxic people and wondered if he was going to use it. Ray refused to use the ring, realizing that without Veronica's control, he could burn himself to death. Veronica supported his decision, but he noted that it would be better to abstain for now. Ray then thanked her for her help, and the girl was surprised by his sudden sincerity. She noticed that he looked unwell due to the effects of mana, and became worried. Ray was silent, listening to the voice behind him. Philip asked if he had a minute. Philip said his team had broken into the basement and taken everything from there. Ray pulled the box towards him and noticed a photo with the inscription, Walter's Shelter. The faces of the people in the photo were hard to make out, but they all had similar energy. He decided to study it later. Philip showed a notebook that seemed important to him. Inside were notes with addresses and tasks: transport hijacking, exits blocked, permission to use magic. Ray realized that these were Mercred's orders. Turning the page, he saw the failed task of investigating the Green Stone, the auction, and Kelly Gold's house, where there were no results. Ray noticed the following entry: Sector 48, Grant Mountain's Bluestone investigation. Failed, no results. The investigations into the yellow and orange stones have similarly failed. He suggested that Murkred was looking for rainbow fragments divided into 7 parts and was giving orders to find stones of certain colors. Philip watched Ray and noted that he would soon leave the sector. He handed Ray a bag of money and said that he would send a courier to him while he was in the sector. Philip added that he would see Ray off on the day of his departure, smiling and thinking that perhaps they would never see each other again. Ray extended his hand to Philip and asked if he wanted to leave the sector with him. Philip was stunned and did not immediately understand the question. He asked again, earlier. The conversation on the terrace continued. Ray remembered what they had talked about. Ray confirmed the seriousness of his proposal, and Philip, remembering his long-standing aspirations, agreed to go with him. But he asked for 2 weeks to hand over the management of the hotel to Kedrick and Jonathan. During this time, Ray was busy with his own affairs, reading books, talking with his grandfather, practicing new techniques, and attending classes with Veronica. She noted his talent, calling him a real genius, and Ray replied that she was just a good teacher. His gaze accidentally fell on Veronica's brothers, who were hiding behind a shelf. Seeing him, they became frightened and ran away. Veronica apologized for their fear and explained that they were very shy, and she herself noted that Ray clearly made an impression on them. The boys dreamed of becoming hunters. Veronica offered to change places with Ray, and he agreed. Sitting on the chair, she concentrated, and magical power began to emanate from her. Ray noticed that she was now much better at handling mana, although he didn't really interfere with her training. A magic circle began to form around Veronica's heart. At first, she felt that it was not enough, because her grandfather did not have much time left. But Ray's support gave her strength. The circle gradually filled with mana, and Veronica almost fell out of her chair in surprise, but Ray held her back. The girl wiped away her tears, thanked him, admitting that she was able to create the circle precisely because of his presence. Ray was surprised, but supported her idea to show the circle to her grandfather. Veronica, smiling, suggested going together, and they went up to the 2nd floor. She was happy, and Ray remained calm. They approached the door together and Veronica knocked. She announced her arrival, but suddenly froze. Something was wrong inside the room. Ray looked at her in surprise. Veronica's eyes froze when she saw her grandfather lying on the floor. The magic circle inside her glowed black and she cried out, realizing what had happened. The first rays of the sun were penetrating the city. Grandpa was lying on the bed with his eyes open. Ray approached him. He asked how long he had slept and learned that it had been about 2.5 days. Grandpa noticed the empty chair next to Ray and thought that Veronica didn't have the resolve to meet his last moments. He appreciated her soft heart and kind soul. Grandfather thanked Ray, noting that the request to become his student was probably unexpected. Ray replied that their interests coincided. His grandfather was looking for a student to pass on the techniques, and he was looking for a teacher. Grandfather thought of Ray as a strange child, and noted that this was probably their last lesson. Ray admitted that he felt no emotion. Grandfather confirmed that he had guessed this. Ray explained that in everyday life, emotions are unavailable to him, and in order to feel anything, he needs to concentrate. At the same time, the volume of available emotions remains extremely limited. When asked if it was a disease, the grandfather replied that the condition of the heart can be called a disease when people close it after bullying or severe grief. Grandpa explained to Ray that he could choose what emotions he felt, and that this made him different from others. Ray asked what kind of magic he used, referring to how his grandfather always understood his intentions and thoughts, even if they weren't spoken. Grandpa smiled and said it wasn't magic. Ray asked if it was, and Grandpa replied that it was actually emotion reading. He explained that even when Ray's face was emotionless, small signs gave them away. The corners of his lips would lift slightly. The eyes widened slightly when listening attentively. Grandfather noted that these signs were barely noticeable, but emotions could be read from them. He suggested that Ray try to learn to read other people's emotions, and if he had a desire to master it as magic, he could learn it. Ray admitted that he cannot distinguish between people's faces, sees them all the same, and usually relies only on their voices and hair color. Grandfather, hearing this, quietly exclaimed, "Oh my God!" amazed by Ray's ability. Ray came down the stairs and saw Veronica sitting on the floor. The girl was crying. He thought that Grandpa didn't have much time left, and noticed that Veronica didn't want to see it. Ray quietly said that this was her last chance to talk to Grandpa. Veronica, with tears in her eyes, rushed up to her grandfather's room. She screamed his name and went inside. Her brothers and sister were already there. They were also crying. Grandfather, noticing Veronica, was glad to see her. The girl smiled, explaining that she had finally managed to create a magic circle. The grandfather extended his hand and said that he knew she could do it. Veronica remembered his words that she would no longer suffer from colds, would not go hungry, and would not have to wait for those who would not return. She cried, telling how happy she was when her grandfather took her with him. Veronica assured them that they would cope with any difficulties and had learned a lot. Grandfather replied that he would not worry, and noted their strength. He also admitted that he was happy to meet them all. Ray remained outside the door, listening to their conversation. It was raining outside, and the cemetery was lined with graves. Veronica had spent a lot of money preparing the grave and the headstone. Graham was buried in the largest central cemetery in Sector 49. The brothers were sleeping in the room, and Veronica was watching them through a crack in the door. She closed the door, and Ray appeared behind her. Veronica thanked him for his help. It would have been difficult to move alone. She wasn't crying, but her mana vessel was vibrating as if it was about to explode at any second. Ray wondered, what kind of emotion was this? He remembered what his grandfather had said about people's facial expressions, and he wondered if he could focus on individual features rather than the whole expression, Ray thought. He watched Veronica closely. Suddenly he realized, this is not it. He did not want to feel sad. Veronica fell to the floor, crying and scratching the floor in pain. "Grandpa, Grandpa," she repeated. Ray leaned over and hugged her. No, he thought. Maybe it was a good thing. If he could genuinely support someone of his own free will. The screams came from far away. Kedrick was crying, saying he would miss him, and Philip promised to come back. Then he got into the car next to Ray. Philip asked if Ray had given a time for their departure. Ray confirmed that Veronica knew and that they were leaving at 10 a.m. today. Earlier, Veronica was surprised and asked if they were going to leave together. Ray explained that he was going with Philip, and Veronica would be able to help with the theoretical part of the magic circles. He noted that she managed to pull him out of danger thanks to her special abilities. Veronica was surprised by the suddenness of everything that was happening and remembered the need to take care of the younger ones. Ray said that Philip's hotel would look after them, and added that she could close the store temporarily while they were away. Kedrick and his subordinates will look after him, and no one will harm him. Veronica thought about it, and Ray realized that she didn't want to leave. She asked for some time to think it over. Philip and Ray were sitting in the car. Philip noted that it was already 10 o'clock, and Ray thought for a moment, then drove off, pressing the gas. Kedrick watched as the car drove away into the distance. Suddenly, Veronica appeared from around the corner, running after the car and trying to catch up with them. Philip noticed that she was hiding behind a rock. Ray extended his hand to help her up, and Veronica grabbed it. Ray pulled her into the car, and the door clicked shut. Philip turned in the front seat, noting that she had decided to go with them after all. Veronica explained that she couldn't stop without changing her mind. Philip looked at her in bewilderment, and the girl explained that she had gathered her courage to make a decision. A little later, they stopped. Philip and Veronica were feeling sick after the long drive, and Ray was checking the car. He noted that there were no problems with the car. They had been driving for 7 hours without a break, and Philip felt very unwell. Ray suggested setting up camp for the night and continuing on in the morning. Philip and Veronica agreed. The fire was lit, and Ray sat down with a plate by the fire. He told about his goal, to find a rainbow. Philip and Veronica were amazed by the news. Ray explained that the rainbow was a stone that generated infinite mana, which was currently split into 7 pieces scattered throughout the world. After collecting the rainbow, you can make a wish. After meeting that man, Ray learned that the Mercreds are also looking for the rainbow, and their boss has one of the shards. Philip realized that Ray would be monitoring Mercred's activities. Ray warned that their path could be dangerous, but promised to protect them, and they would help them achieve their goals. Veronica said that she had already learned enough, and Philip noted that he had encountered death more than once. Philip asked if Ray wanted him to handle the finances and also offered to take over the negotiations. Veronica said she would take on the role of magic guide. Courage and strength emanated from both of them, and Ray noted it. Philip spoke about his goal, to find his mother, who left him for another sector to earn money. As a child, she promised to return, and this desire united his fundraising efforts. Veronica, touched, cried, but then explained that her goal was to complete her grandfather's research on black rain. This phenomenon discolors the earth and skin, causing incurable diseases, including the eternal sleep syndrome that her grandfather suffered from. She wanted to finish the job and make sure no one else suffered from the black rain. Philip said that he was ready to help in any way he could, even if he didn't yet fully understand how. Veronica repeated the same, declaring her readiness. Ray agreed, noting that they would help each other, because everyone had their own motives. They decided to rely on each other and joined fists over the fire. Ray was surprised by this simple action. In his opinion, it did not add strength like magic, but he felt warmth and unity. They lightly bumped fists, smiling. Philip and Veronica felt fear. They understood that their lives could be in danger. A herd of deer with bright red eyes was rushing towards them. The car continued moving, and in front of them, a huge number of animals grew so quickly that they did not have time to prepare. It had been about 10 days since they had left. Philip and Veronica were discussing it in the car, trying to estimate the travel time, and Ray clarified that it had been 9 days. They had almost arrived at the appointed place when Philip noticed a cloud of dust ahead. In fact, it turned out to be a herd of deer. Veronica explained that these were mountain deer with rocky skin, and Philip was surprised by their unusual appearance. Ray assumed that the animals were scared of something and that they were running from someone. Realizing that a breakthrough was impossible, Ray instructed Veronica to create a magical shield around the machine. She had to make a sphere 3 meters in diameter and adjust the elements so that the shield would move with the car, protecting them from the approaching herd. Veronica closed her eyes and concentrated, trying to create a protective sphere 3 meters in diameter that would follow the car. Philip screamed in terror as the herd of deer raced straight towards them. The car drove straight into the herd, and Ray struggled to maintain control. He ordered Veronica to direct all her mana to maintaining the shield, preventing it from being destroyed. The girl tried her best to hold on to the magic, but her energy was quickly running out, and Ray understood that this could no longer be done. He turned to Philip, reminding him of his desire to learn to drive. Philip was a little confused, but took the wheel. Ray climbed onto the roof of the car, his eyes glowing red, and watched the herd. Among the deer, he spotted a blue one, the right animal. The protective field began to crack. Veronica's nose began to bleed, and Ray realized that the shield was about to break. Her mana was special. The rings filled her with power, and only she could create such a wide barrier. Ray realized that his abilities were limited. At that moment, the protective barrier split, and one of the deer jumped straight at the car. Philip screamed, and Ray, watching the flying animal, was shocked. Suddenly, there was an explosion, throwing the deer back. Philip and Veronica screamed, and Veronica looked out of the window. Smoke was rising from the roof, and she was scared. Tears came to her eyes. Gradually, the smoke cleared, and she saw Ray sitting on the roof of the car. He realized that the only way out was to use metal transformation. The car glowed red, the body became reinforced, and Ray warned that exiting the car at this moment was dangerous. Veronica quickly climbed in. Ray gave the order to press the gas to the limit, and Philip pressed the pedal. The machine tore through the herd, moving forward, and around it flashed reflections of magic and power. They stopped in a deserted area. Veronica knelt on the sand, trying to recover, and Philip stood nearby. Ray looked around. Dead deer lay in the middle of the desert, all covered in blood. He came closer and examined them carefully, noticing that the shell of mountain deer was usually as hard as stone, and such wounds could not have been from an ordinary attack. The wounds were too large, as if they had been inflicted by special ammunition. Suddenly, a man with a gun appeared from behind. He smiled and asked if the children were lost, pointing out their vulnerability in such a remote place. He also noticed Veronica's face. Ray immediately grabbed the man by the head and slammed his face into the ground. The man screamed, and blood began to flow from his nose. Ray handed Philip a dagger and ordered him to cut his throat on signal. Philip was stunned and did not immediately understand what to do. A group of men were watching this scene. Philip held the dagger, feeling an internal tension. In his entire life, he had never had to put a knife to someone else's neck. He knew he had to do it. He ordered the man to stay still and give him everything he had, threatening him with a dagger. Veronica watched Philip in horror, and Ray assessed the situation, seeing the determination of both of them. The crowd of men discussed what was happening. One of the bandits tried to intervene, begging Philip not to make things worse and claiming that they wanted to help. Ray told Philip to just make a scratch, without causing fatal harm. Philip did as he was ordered, leaving a slight wound on the man's neck. The crowd was stunned, recognizing that this little guy had hurt Vector. The man, still holding the weapon, tried to intimidate them, claiming that he could destroy them at any moment. Ray, concentrating, summoned magical fireballs in the air, demonstrating his power. The man realized with surprise that he was a mage. The men apologized, bowing, admitting their mistakes, and asking for leniency. Ray, not wanting to make things worse, offered a simple compromise. If they met a few demands, the group would immediately retreat. He asked what the men were doing in the area. They explained that they were looking for something unusual, including a deer with a blue gemstone on its forehead. Ray pressed for more details. The men said their client, John Greed, was well known in Sector 40 for his well installation business. In his youth, he was lost in the wilderness. Suddenly, a blue mountain deer with a stone in his forehead appeared before him, supposedly able to turn his body into water and give water from the air. The men thought it was strange, but did not go into details. When Ray asked where he could meet the client, the man with the knife in his hands warned that it would be difficult to do it directly, so that the old man would not find out too much. After Ray barely grazed him with his dagger, the man admitted that the client was at the Galad Hotel in Sector 48. The man was amazed by Ray's insight, who, according to him, saw right through everything. Ray blamed the men for their actions causing the premature migration of mountain deer. The men objected, explaining that deer usually congregated in large groups with large gaps between the herds, and it is impossible to gather several thousand individuals by human efforts. Most likely, the migration began on its own. They arrived in Sector 48 5 days ago and immediately noticed that the deer had begun to move earlier than usual, probably due to the commercial value of the antlers and meat. The men regretted not having prepared more transport to control the herd. Ray confirmed the need for compensation for the impact of the migration, noting that even though they had successfully broken through the herd, the situation was dangerous. He demanded payment for the repairs, and Philip agreed to name the amount. The parties eventually agreed on compensation in the amount of 250,000 shillings. Philip suggested putting the money in a safe in the trunk to keep it safe, and believed it should go to Ray. Ray insisted on an equal distribution, explaining that with every income there was no need to divide the profits according to merit. This will prevent possible disputes and make the process fair. Philip and Veronica agreed with his principle of fairness. At that moment, Veronica opened her jacket and a small blue deer appeared. Philip and Ray were amazed. Veronica explained that she found the baby near some wounded deer and thought it was dangerous to leave him there. She hid him under her sweater to protect him. The girl had already named him Fran, having determined that he was a boy by his behavior. The fawn was screaming, but it was decided to take him with them until they found the pack. Ray thought about it, remembering the moment he climbed onto the roof of his car and saw a deer that looked suspiciously like his parent. He realized that this was connected with the story he had told and decided to take the baby with him. Veronica smiled happily, and Philip quietly exhaled, realizing that everything went well. The next day, they walked through the city, feeling a sharp difference from the previous sector. It was a completely different place. They walked along the sidewalk among the crowd of people. Fran was asleep, and Veronica carefully covered him with a blanket, checking the car doors to make sure everything was safe. Suddenly, several guys blocked their way. They tried to talk, asking who allowed them to enter their territory and reminding them of the toll. Ray's eyes flashed red, foreshadowing possible danger. After a while, the attackers were already beaten and bruised. Ray asked them what the name of the gang leader was. One of the guys answered, Leonardo. Ray said he had a job for him and that he should come to the Galot Hotel on 22nd Street. The boys nodded and shouted, "Understood!" and ran away. Ray watched them, thinking that this was the 6th time such situations had happened. Margarita remarked that she wished they would never appear again. But Ray knew that if they left the stranger alone, the others might think the gang was harmless. Philip thought about this situation. Philip suggested changing their outfit to reduce the likelihood of being picked on by others. Ray and Veronica were surprised, but understood the meaning of his words. Clean and neat clothes help to perceive a person differently. And now they were heading to a luxury hotel, where this was especially important. At the same time, Philip offered to buy a suit for Ray and an evening dress for Veronica. Veronica tried on the dress and asked how it suited her. Ray, looking at himself in the suit, noted that the change of clothes had actually worked. Philip paid the seller and asked to leave the old clothes in the next hotel room. The man agreed, and Ray asked how Philip had managed to get a discount. Philip replied that it was a commercial secret. The group walked down the street in new suits, and Ray noticed a man whose inner energy was glowing purple. He was surprised and watched the reactions of those around him. Longing and admiration could be seen in people's eyes. Ray wondered how much changing clothes changed a person's perception, and asked Philip if there were other ways to influence people's reactions besides appearance. Philip explained that the first impression depends largely on appearance, but the main thing is a person's energy, his aura. For some people, even cheap clothes give the impression of elegance, while for others, expensive clothes are powerless. He noted that Ray belongs to the first type. His status and energy make a strong impression, regardless of external details. When they approached the tall buildings, Philip was amazed by the height. Ray suggested that they go in right away, but Philip stopped, warning of possible danger. Ray walked confidently past the guard, and Philip and Veronica followed him. The guard looked at them carefully, but, seeing their smiles, responded in kind. Veronica noted that everything worked out, and Philip was surprised that Ray had predicted that they would be let in. Ray only briefly said that he acted on intuition. Ray noticed that the guard did not radiate any hostility or wariness, and so his glow was calm. Philip approached the reception desk and said hello, after which the man in the suit greeted him back and asked what had happened. Philip explained that they wanted to go back to the room, but they had forgotten its number. The man asked the name under which the room was booked, and Philip said John Grit, the name of their grandfather. The employee pointed to number 207, and they headed toward the room. People skills were important, Philip noted as they opened the door. There was a man standing at the door who said they had the wrong number. Philip explained that they had come on a tip from mercenaries from the Skyle squad and wanted to get information about the mountain deer. The man thought that the mercenaries really liked to talk and offered to help, but warned that the boss was not so easily accessible. Ray realized that even Philip would not be able to negotiate directly. He activated the power and looked around the room. From the sounds, there were 2 more people inside. The guard ordered them to leave, threatening to use force. Mana inside began to waver, although Veronica stood still, which surprised her. Veronica noticed Ray's hands glowing with magic. He extended them toward the guard, completely focused on his goal, not choosing the means or methods. But suddenly a stern voice was heard. "Enough!" And Ray stopped, surprised. The man standing in front of them said that the boss had given them permission to go inside. Ray came back to himself under Veronica's intervention, asking if he had tried to use the surrounding mana. Philip was also surprised. They entered the room and were confronted by businessman John Greed. He invited them to sit down and offered to tell them about the animal he was looking for. John Grit, director of Colonel Water, was responsible for the supply of drinking water in Sector 40. Clean water used to be so expensive that even the poor couldn't afford it, he said. Ray clarified that the Elta River was also polluted. John confirmed that the water was muddy, and there was debris floating in it from the current, much like it is now, although the riverbed has now almost disappeared. John explained that he himself came from nomadic tribes. The old-timers did not allow them to settle in the sector, so they wandered the wastelands, leading a nomadic lifestyle. The fate of their group depended entirely on finding the next oasis. When the life of the last captured oasis was exhausted, they went in search of the next one. Mahail's group disappeared without a trace, unable to find a new oasis. John instructed one of the men to remain and wait, promising that he would definitely find the oasis and return to them, and then set off. John found himself on the hot sand, exhausted, clambering about. Night had fallen, and he lay motionless. Suddenly, a drop of water fell on his hand. Raising his head, John saw a blue deer with a stone in its forehead, looking straight at him. The deer landed on the ground, and a pack of wild deer, different from the usual ones, gathered around him. The deer howled, and the pack responded with an echo. The bright light made John close his eyes. When he opened them, he saw the green life of an oasis. Water, grass, trees, and it was raining. John talked about starting a water business at this oasis and how they tried to supply water at an affordable price, understanding the value of clean water better than anyone else. Now, the situation has changed. The old source has dried up. Suitable sites for development are already occupied, and many companies have entered into competition. In this case, money has not been without influence. John spoke of seeing blood relatives go crazy and attack each other with knives. Only then did he realize that it was time to leave this business, and now his only desire was to meet the mountain deer again to thank him for his past help. Ray assured John that they would help him find the deer. Veronica and Philip were surprised by this statement, but Ray repeated his promise. John was pleased with Ray's words and asked who they really were. Ray introduced himself as a mercenary, which surprised Veronica and Philip. Suddenly, a hunter from the desert knocked on the door. He was informed that the guests had arrived first, which caused him displeasure. John, however, realized that there was a good reason for such a revelation and noted that the guests were indeed mercenaries. Skyle, who was nearby, doubted the old man, noting that a magician was sitting right in front of him. Ray mused that their appearance had played a decisive role. At the hotel, they had been helped by their neat clothes, but now, to be trusted, they needed to look different, dusty and dirty. John admitted that a mercenary is usually considered to be an armed and experienced person. Suddenly, a golden lightning illuminated the ceiling. John was surprised by what was happening, and Ray directed his magical power. The man behind him screamed in shock, unaware of the circle, and demanded to know who Ray was. Ray studied the man closely and noted that his abilities were of the second circle of magic, and asked if he could be considered a mercenary. John asked Ray to finally stop